Chapter 65. Just as Grimm was feeling proud of the demon crocodile hunter's extraordinary regenerative abilities, a strange noise suddenly rang out. Horrifying patchwork corpses jumped out of the flames one after another, howling as they pounced at the demon crocodiles. Damn it, so many! 11 agile and nimble patchwork corpses surrounded him in a fan shape. Grimm activated his bracelet without hesitation, and a green thorny armor wrapped around his body. What followed next was a bloody melee between the demon crocodile hunter and the patchwork corpses. It was obvious that the patchwork corpses' target was the huge demon crocodiles, but their real target was Grimm, who was perched on the back of the demon crocodiles. This was actually the choice most acolytes would make when dealing with summoner-type opponents. Compared to the powerful and fearless summon creatures, the summoner's own defense was much weaker. So rather than wasting a lot of energy on the summoned creatures, it was easier to deal with the summoner in one fell swoop. That was why Blackwood sacrificed the 11 corpse puppets to keep the demon crocodiles busy. Only then did he sneak away, once again using his most proficient curse attacks. Grimm controlled the demon crocodile hunter to deal with the patchwork corpse's frenzied attacks while he held his breath, trying his best to deal with the mysterious black chains that Blackwood constantly threw at him. It made him so busy that he couldn't even put it into words. Many of the patchwork corpses were killed by the demon crocodile hunter at close range. However, every patchwork corpse that died would cause a huge explosion, corroding a large part of the demon crocodile's body. After the third patchwork corpse exploded, the demon crocodile's front half was already full of holes, no longer as solid and powerful as before. This couldn't go on. Grimm laughed, quickly stuffing something into his mouth and stomping his right foot. The earth puppet that had been throwing attacks at him immediately swelled up and moved backwards, swallowing the demon crocodile hunter's body. In the next second, the huge demon crocodile hunter dived into the ground like a whale, disappearing without a trace. The remaining 8 patchwork corpses pounced forward, digging at the solid ground with all their might, but to no avail. Damn it! A commotion immediately broke out among the spectators. How could this damned brat travel through the ground? This time, Heimu was going to be in big trouble. To be honest, when Blackwood saw his opponent and the summoned earth golem disappear from his sight, his heart was also at a loss and frustrated. Damn it! How was he supposed to fight like this? If he couldn't see his opponent, how could his curse attack lock onto him? While he was hesitating, he vaguely discovered something underground with his spiritual perception. His expression changed drastically, and he abruptly slammed the long staff in his hand. A thick claw made of mud suddenly stretched out from the ground beside Heimu, and with a fierce gust of wind, the claw smashed Heimu into minced meat. At this moment, half of the Aborigine hunter's upper body emerged from the soil. The attack had clearly succeeded, but the native who had transformed into Grimm did not look happy at all. Instead, he looked into the distance with a piercing gaze. There, a peace corpse suddenly crawled on the ground and struggled madly. In just 2 to 3 seconds, the distorted black would replace the patchwork corpse. The native's expression changed slightly, and he wanted to burrow back in the ground, but it was too late. The corpse that had been smashed into minced meat by the demon crocodile's giant claw exploded with a bang, and a large patch of gray dyed the demon crocodile hunter's exposed body. The strange, sizzling sound of corrosion made people's hearts beat wildly. Grimm's eyes looked through the native's eyes at Heimu, who had stood up once again, and he sank back into the ground without a word. This caused the patchwork corpses that were rushing over to pounce on thin air. F***CK. Looking at the empty battlefield again, apart from the 7 patchwork corpses he had summoned and the messy ground, there was not a trace of that despicable brat. Heimu's fury and resentment were at their peak. The 7 patchwork corpses scattered around under Heimu's command. This way, he could block that bastard's path of retreat the moment he attacked, and it could also provide more flexibility for his corpse puppet transformation. However, just as Heimu gathered his mental strength around his body and silently sensed every change in the ground, the soil under the feet of a patchwork corpse in the distance suddenly boiled. Then, Earth spears rose from the ground and pierced the patchwork corpse into a meat skewer. Bang! The patchwork corpse self-destructed again. However, this time, the large area of gray scattered on the ground did not hurt the patchwork corpse at all. This was because the patchwork corpse's attack was completed underground, and he did not show himself at all. Hey Moo and the people at the side could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. Damn it, today's battle is going to be decided. In the next few minutes, the cunning Grim did not take the initiative to attack Hey Moo. Instead, he constantly wandered around the periphery, looking for an opportunity to kill a patchwork corpse, as if he wanted to eliminate all of Grim's subordinates. If he was killed by Grim, how could he use his corpse puppets to transform when he encountered danger later? Left with no choice, Hey Moo could only summon the remaining 4 patchwork corpses to his side and surround him. However, if Hey Moo's main body was attacked, even if he used his corpse puppet transformation to escape, his main body would still be within the patchwork corpse's attack range, and the danger would increase greatly. However, under the current circumstances, he could only take a risk and try his best to lure that detestable bastard out of the ground, and then seek victory amidst the danger. Once he thought about how he had been forced into such a sorry state by a beginner acolyte, Hey Moo's eerie eyes could not help but burn with a cold, ghastly flame. He could not wait to grab that bastard and give him a good beating. Unfortunately, things did not go according to his wishes. The one being beaten up was Hey Moo. In the latter half of the journey, that detestable bastard did not show himself, and instead frequently used long-range spells to attack him from underground. Although he could detect most of the spells before they reached him, there were still 2 patchwork corpses that died miserably under the combination of quagmire and earth spears. Hey Moo vividly displayed the sorrow of being unable to catch the enemy while taking a beating. Seeing the corpse puppets that he had painstakingly crafted and were not weaker than ordinary high-ranking acolytes being killed by the enemy, Hey Moo's anger turned to anger, and from anger to sorrow. He was almost tortured to tears by Grim, when Ah Fu shook his head and sighed, announcing the outcome of the battle. Hey Moo stood rooted to the ground and actually fainted from anger. The onlookers looked at each other in dismay. Even if they wanted to console that unlucky Hey Moo, they did not know how to say it. If they did not have the means to attack the enemy underground, no matter who it was that encountered such an opponent, they would not be able to bear the consequences. Hey Moo could only blame his bad luck for being picked by Ah Fu to fight against such a freak. It was no wonder that he ended up in such a gloomy state. Ah Fu, with a gloomy expression, grabbed Kevin in front of him and interrogated him fiercely. Didn't you say that his abilities were not that special? How did this happen? Tell me honestly, if you met such an opponent, would you be able to win? Kevin Blackhand swallowed his saliva with difficulty. If it wasn't a fair fight, given half a day's time in the wilderness, I would definitely kill him without knowing how he died. But if it was an empty place like this, I wouldn't be able to win. I wouldn't be able to do anything to him. At this moment, Grim carefully peeked half of his body out from the ground. After confirming that he had won, he delightedly crawled out. After staying underground for such a long time, the demon crocodile's external injuries had already healed completely. It was no different from when the battle started, which made the onlookers click their tongues in wonder. But when they thought of the wager they had placed before the battle, the onlookers' expressions turned ugly. Looking at the young lad who was striding towards him, Fu could only rub his bald head and ask loudly, "Minsa, let's do a count. See how much we have to pay." Minsa, who was dressed in a black robe and had the temperament of a noble, did not hide anything and announced loudly. The collateral submitted by Sir Grim includes 9 mana crystals, 2 level, 3 items, 1 level for item, 1 level, 1 item, and the Devil Vine Lady's witchcraft notes. The initial valuation is 417 mana crystals. According to the odds of 10, 1, we have to pay a total of 4,170 magical crystals. The total amount of magical crystals that everyone had pledged before the battle was only 3,270. So we still owe this kid 900 magical crystals. Yes. The onlookers looked at each other and could not help but look at Kevin who had brought this bastard here. Almost in an instant, Kevin, who had always been calm and collected, began to sweat. Grim, who was already grinning from ear to ear, quickly ran out to smooth things over. It's rare for the seniors to give me such a chance to show off. How can I ask for more? This is more than enough. I, Grim, have never been a greedy person. Hearing Grim's words, many high-level acolytes and quasi-sorcerers could not help but shake their heads and sigh, feeling that it was not worth it. That Blackwood was not weak either. He was even considered average among the high-level acolytes in the camp. However, because of his lack of preparation, he had been taken advantage of by this slippery kid and fainted on the spot. How could the onlookers not be angry? Hey, that cunning kid, don't be too happy. You won so easily because your ability was too good at restraining Blackwood. We will definitely pay you back for the magical crystals we owe you. But do you dare to have another bet with us? How about it? The one who spoke was the berserk man with the thunderbolt axe that Grim had seen when he first arrived. He was obviously a body refiner and used lightning spells as support. Grim smiled sinisterly. Why wouldn't I dare? However, my summon puppet was damaged today and needs to be repaired. How about we do it tomorrow? Hearing this, the berserk man was overjoyed. Even the eyes of the onlookers around him lit up. They were obviously very tempted. With this night's effort, they believed that they could help Maka find a way to defeat his opponent if they worked together. This detestable kid's method of summoning puppets was special, allowing him to hide underground and attack. As long as they could break his method, how could a broken puppet made of mud defeat Maku, who was famous for his strength? That was just wishful thinking. The acolytes could not help but laugh sinisterly, perhaps because they had imagined something that would make them happy. Chapter 66. Only after the sky darkened did Grim safely return to his wizard tower residence. As soon as he entered his room, he locked the door and took out all the good stuff from his waist pouch. He lined them up on the wooden table and rubbed his hands, licking his lips as he excitedly looked from left to right, then from right to left. The excitement in his body and mind could no longer be described with words. The 10 bottles on the left contained the concentration potions that he had been dreaming of. They were top-grade goods that were specially provided to the elite apprentices in the camp, and their effects were 20% better than those in the outside world. These concentration potions were sold for 200 magic crystals each, but they had already cost Grim 2,000 magic crystals. If it wasn't for this unexpected windfall, Grim probably wouldn't have been able to afford them, even if he skinned himself alive. This amount of concentration potions was enough for Grim to break through the threshold of a beginner apprentice and successfully raise his mental strength to the peak of an intermediate apprentice. As for whether he could successfully break through the threshold, it would depend on his potential. Grim's gaze lingered on the concentration potions for a long time before he reluctantly moved on to the next item. It was a blue magic gem. The moment Grim took it out, he could see tiny electric arcs lingering on its surface. It was like a magic gem with its own life force. It could continuously absorb the energy of lightning in the air and create a strange world that was most suitable for the survival of lightning elements. Judging from its quality, this was definitely a magic core taken from the body of a quasi-wizard storm giant. In terms of species characteristics, the storm giant should be classified as an elemental creature, but the storm giant bloodline currently existing in the sorcerer world was very strange. It was said that in ancient times, a great wizard had conducted some extremely dangerous bloodline experiments. He tried to use witchcraft to give his bloodline to a group of wind elementals in order to expand his bloodline. On the sorcerer continent, those who could be called great sorcerers were those powerful sorcerers who were above rank 3. It had to be said that his experiment was very successful. He had successfully added a new species to the wizard world, the storm giant. It was a powerful witchcraft creature that had both the bloodline power of a wizard and the body of an elemental incarnation. It was a pity that these storm giants had problems with their own identity. Obviously, they were more willing to get close to the simple-minded and easier to control wind elementals. Therefore, after a large number of storm giants escaped the control of the Magi, They combined with the natural wind elements and built a small storm giant kingdom in the Emerald Hills in the middle of the continent. Due to their special identity and the dual characteristics of both sorcerers and wind elementals, they were able to summon countless wind elemental creatures from the elemental world after building a huge storm altar. This allowed them to become a moderately powerful force in the center of the Sorcerer Continent. The lightning gem in Grimm's hand was most likely from the Storm Kingdom. According to the witchcraft contract between the Storm Kingdom and the Scattered Towers, all forces in the central part of the continent were not allowed to hunt the storm giants for their elemental crystal cores. However, these sorcery contracts obviously could not stop the existence of the black market and hunters. Hence, such rare resources were still quietly circulating in the dark. The quasi-wizard level Earth elemental crystal core that Grimm had obtained last time might have only cost 500 magic crystals, but this lightning gem had cost Grimm 1,200 magic crystals, for no other reason than its rarity. In terms of battle strength, perhaps the Earth elemental crystal core could give Grimm a greater boost in battle strength. However, considering the variety of battle tactics, Grimm felt that it would be better to have a lightning gem. If the Earth elemental crystal could give Grimm the ability to move through the earth, what about the lightning gem? Perhaps it could give Grimm the ability to fly in the blue sky in advance. To be honest, ever since he had flown in the sky on the Socratic Eagle, Grimm had been infatuated with the feeling of flying freely. However, Grimm still needed the AI chip to calculate and adjust how to use this lightning gem well, using the power of the spell formation to fully tap into the gem's potential. Hence, he could only put it aside for now and wait for the AI chip to complete its calculations before deciding how to create a new generation of lightning golems. As for the third item on the table, Grimm had exchanged the magic vine lady's notes. It was a powerful fire elemental treasure that came from underground volcanoes, the fire diamond. Unfortunately, the fire diamond was only a magic treasure and not the core of a fire elemental creature. Hence, it was difficult to use it to create a fire elemental magic wand. However, although it could not be used to create a magic wand, the fire diamond was still a magic treasure that Grimm had been looking for. With it, Grimm was one step closer to the magic wand he had envisioned. Using the fire diamond as an inlay for the magic wand would undoubtedly increase the speed at which fire particles gathered. It would also increase the power of Grimm's fire elemental spells. Hence, it was not much less useful than a magic wand. Now that he had the gem at the top of the wand and the mithril for the rune formation to create the body of the wand, the only thing he lacked now was a magic wand suitable for Grimm. If he wanted to create a fire magic wand, fire dragonwood was the worst choice, followed by fire coral. Finally, the spine of a fire elemental magic beast was the most suitable choice. However, these rare resources could only be found by chance. Where could Grimm find the spine of a fire elemental magic beast that was suitable for him? That was why Grimm had been hesitating all this time. He did not know if he should continue to wait for suitable materials to appear, or if he should gather some fire coral as soon as possible. There would never be an answer to this question. Therefore, Grimm could only smile bitterly and put them all into his storage belt. Although he really wanted to try out the effects of the concentration potion, he still had an important mission to complete tonight. And this mission was directly related to the battle he was going to fight tomorrow. Therefore, after admiring his spoils of war for the day, Grimm hurried to the third floor of the Wizard Tower and went straight to the alchemy laboratory. He only returned to his residence when it was almost dawn. Unfortunately, before he had even slept for 2 hours, someone knocked on the wooden door of his residence. It was Kevin the Blackhand. Looking at the way he followed Grimm closely, it was as if he was afraid that Grimm would suddenly run away. However, when he saw Grimm's listless face, he could not help but ask, "What did you do last night? Did you forget that there was a very important battle today?" I suddenly received such a large sum of money yesterday. I was so excited that I couldn't sleep," Grimm said with a pair of dark circles under his eyes. Kevin had an expression that said, "Only a fool would believe you." But in the end, he still asked out of curiosity, Are you sure you can win today's battle? You should know that in order to prevent a kid like you from suddenly appearing, those old people have been busy all night. I'm afraid they've already thought of various ways to deal with your earth element puppet. Are you sure you can fight, Mark? Do you want me to win or lose? Kid, to be honest, I still think highly of you. Your ability is unique among all the acolytes I've seen. If you use it well, you'll be very popular in a place like the Dark Crypt. This is also the main reason why I was so eager to recruit you into the elite group. But your first appearance was too eye-catching after all. Boss Baldy just wanted you to show off your skills and get familiar with the elite group. But you directly beat up an old man like Heimu. Is it a big deal? It's more than a big deal. I've never seen the members of the elite group so united against a common enemy. For you, that actually made plans, contributed magic tools, and used everything they could to deal with Earthwalking. So you should be careful today. I've already reminded that kid Mark, as long as you admit defeat, he'll stop immediately. I won't leave you with any lasting memories. Lord Kevin, do you trust me? HM? No matter how they prepare, I'm still confident in today's battle. So, if you trust me, why don't you bet on me? Kevin instantly fell silent. Looking at Grimm's serious expression, he was a little confused. Today, he was going to fight against a rare opponent in the camp, Thunderaxe Mark. He didn't have an obvious weakness like Blackwood the day before. Blackwood was, after all, a dark spellcaster who dealt with corpses and flesh all day long. Once his curse attacks and corpse puppets attacks were ineffective, he would be helpless. After all, his original body was a fragile human skeleton that would fall at the slightest touch. But Thunderaxe Mark was completely different. His tyrannical strength was enough to fight against Grimm's demon crocodile puppet. His outstanding physique also gave him a hopeless resistance to magic and physical attacks. As long as he had a way to force Grimm out of the ground, or a way to directly attack the ground, Grimm's earth puppet would not be able to last more than 3 to 5 minutes against him. Under such circumstances, where did Grimm get his confidence from? This huge puzzle had been bothering Kevin. Even when the two of them got off the giant eagle and walked into camp, he was still thinking hard. Looking at the crowd of people who had been waiting bitterly in the distance, Grimm smiled and whispered into Kevin's ear. Is there a need to be so troubled, Lord? You've already offended everyone when you brought me into the camp yesterday. Why don't they place their bets on me today? Once I win, what can they do to you, the creditor? Why are you still hesitating? Kevin's expression became even more bitter. Chapter 67. When Grimm stood in the field once more, he immediately felt an oppressive aura coming from Mark's body. In his previous life on Earth, the term imposing manner was perhaps just a metaphor. However, in this high magic world where even spiritual beliefs could become a powerful force, the spiritual pressure and imposing manner that was so dense that it was almost tangible could truly be felt by people. Through the feedback from the AI chip, Grimm deduced that Mark's strength and vitality were both above 17, while his spiritual force was slightly lower at 16. Grimm felt as if he was standing in a natural storm with such a powerful aura, and it was difficult for him to move forward. The skin on the front of his entire body even felt a slight stinging and burning sensation. Grimm furrowed his brows. It seemed like he had to quickly raise his spiritual force, or else he would feel pressured and suffocated just by facing a high-ranked acolyte. This was also because Grimm's rank was too low. If he had the strength of a mid-ranked acolyte, he would be able to combine his elemental energy and spiritual force to form an energy field. At that time, if he met an enemy stronger than him, he would not be naked like he was now. Thunderbolt Tomahawk Mark was a burly man with a height of 5 meters. He had a broad body and strong muscles. Even though he wasn't holding the huge tomahawk on his back, his violent aura didn't diminish in the slightest. At this moment, he looked at Grimm's frail figure and could not help but laugh out loud. Kid, you've got guts. You knew that you would be tortured today, but you still dared to come. Ha ha, I like it. Grimm squinted his eyes, enduring the discomfort brought about by the difference in rank. It's still too early to say whether I'll win or lose. I hope Lord Mark will go easy on me later. Ha! Well said, well said. Even though they said that they would break your legs and crush half your bones, Mark, quite like you. Good kid. You actually angered Blackwood so much that he fainted. It's quite satisfying to say that. Hee hee. I'm in a good mood today, so I'll just break your legs. This little bit of pain will be a welcome gift for you when you enter the camp. Ugh, breaking both arms and legs might not be an incurable injury here, but the pain of the treatment process was unavoidable. Therefore, Grim could only roll his eyes as he listened to the other party talk about such a hurtful topic as if he was bestowing it on him. Hey, are you guys done? Once the bets are tallied up, I'll start the battle here. How long do you want me to prepare? Maka was obviously impatient. He rubbed his hands and shouted at the side of the field. On the sidelines, it was still crowded and lively. Groups of wizard apprentices and quasi-sorcerers crowded around Minsa and announced their bets loudly. 170 magic crystals on Ma-Ku. 230 magic crystals on Ma-Ku. 90 magic crystals on Ma-Ku. The number of mana crystals on Ma-Ku's side increased exponentially on a huge fluorescent stone slab erected at the side of the field, and soon reached a high of 3,680. On the other side, there were 700 mana crystals under Grim's name. Furthermore, Grim had placed a bet himself. Otherwise, it would have been very difficult to win the bet if everyone had placed their bets one-sided. The odds today were not as exaggerated as the day before. After everyone had reached a consensus, the bald-headed Fu took over the bet as the banker, and the odds were 4-1. If Grim were to lose to Ma-Ku, he would not only suffer physical pain, he would also have to bear a large debt. At that time, he would probably have to sell himself to the camp and slowly do missions to pay back the debt. To the battle maniacs in the camp, earning money was not a big deal. What they wanted to see was to kill this newbie. However, just as Afu was about to announce the start of the battle, a deep and hoarse voice suddenly sounded. 300 magic crystals. I bet Grim will win. Although the voice was not loud, it suddenly froze the atmosphere like a cold current. Everyone froze for a moment before they remembered to look at the owner of the voice. Blackwood. It was actually Blackwood. At that moment, everyone felt as if the world was spinning, as if day and night had been reversed. How? How is this possible? It would not be strange if everyone in the camp had bet on Grim, but it shouldn't have been Blackwood. Weren't we helping him vent his anger? Just when everyone's mouths were wide open and they were dumbstruck, another voice suddenly rang out from the crowd. I also bet on Grim. 270 magic crystals. Kevin. It was Blackhand Kevin. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air, and the expressions on their faces were very interesting. As the banker for today, Afu felt that the sun was a bit dazzling, and the magic crystals piled up beside him were not so cute. Although he did not have the time to study those weird prophecy spells, he vaguely felt that today's bet was somewhat out of his control. Staring fiercely at Blackwood and Kevin, Afu shouted impatiently, "The bet has been decided. The wager has been set. I declare that the battle begins now." As soon as Fu gave the order, both sides in the arena immediately made their moves. The brawny man, Mark, waved his hand, and the battle axe on his back appeared in his huge, fan-like palm. Along with the crackling sound of thunder, countless blue electric arcs swam and flickered around his body. With the powerful electric current sensing, Grim could smell the stench of the electric current burning the air in the arena even from 100 meters away. Even though he was very confident in the demon crocodile hunter under him, Grim still did not dare to block Thunder Axe Mark's long-awaited attack. Stamping its right foot on the ground, the demon crocodile hunter was already moving as fast as it could under Grim's urging. Maka raised his head and let out a deafening battle howl. His footsteps shook the earth as he charged at the demon crocodile that was diving down at high speed. His footsteps weren't heavy, but with every step he took, he would leave behind a shallow pit that was covered in fine cracks like a spider web. His steps were not big, but he managed to reach Grim before the demon crocodile completely disappeared. With a howl, the demon crocodile's thick and long tail, covered with thorns and sarcomas, swung over and collided with Mark's battle axe that was filled with thunder. There was a loud bang, followed by the splashing of mud and gravel and the sudden explosion of a small lightning storm. Grim's body that was wrapped by the Aborigine hunter suddenly sank into the ground, and only then did he avoid the dirt and lightning attack by a hair's breadth. Everyone could clearly see that before the demon crocodile had sunk into the ground, the lower half of its body and tail had disappeared. It looked extremely miserable. Mark, on the other hand, stomped on the ground with both feet and used the force of the impact to leap high into the air. In midair, he suddenly let out a violent roar and threw the battle axe with all his strength. His target was the place where Grim had disappeared. With another earth-shattering bang, the thunderclap battle axe hit the ground with blinding lightning storm, instantly creating a huge pit that was more than half a meter deep. The lightning storm that had suddenly exploded continuously at the bottom of the pit, burning the dirt and gravel into a glass-like substance. Such a violent attack, let alone facing it head-on. Even if a junior acolyte was caught in the aftershocks, he would still be seriously injured, if not dead. Through everyone's sharp mental perception, they could sense that Grim's life force had been reduced by more than 2/3 in the blink of an eye. Fortunately, the ground had taken most of the damage for him, and he had only suffered some aftershocks. Hence, Mark's thunderous attack did not kill him instantly. This caused everyone to shake their heads and sigh in regret. If Mark had been just a little faster and used just a little more force, perhaps that kid called Grim would have been smothered to death in the shallow underground. A junior acolyte challenging a senior acolyte? What a joke. If they really fought, Grim would not even be able to take a single blow from Mark. Perhaps only a good-for-nothing like Blackwood will be knocked down by a mere junior acolyte. Enduring the puzzled, mocking, and disdainful gazes of the crowd, Blackwood hid his face under the shadow of his dark hood. Only a pair of green willow. The wisps flickered faintly, and no one knew what he was thinking. Only Kevin the Black Hand's expression fluctuated with the changes in the battle. To be honest, Mark's violent attack almost scared Kevin out of his wits. Kevin had painstakingly saved up that 270 magic crystals bet over the past 2 to 3 years, and he had hoped to use it to exchange for a decent enchanted dagger. If he had been hot-headed and smashed into a muddy pit for no reason, he would have lost everything. What did that Grim have to rely on? That magic crocodile would probably be smashed into a pile of mud by Mark the moment it showed its head. Kid, don't screw me over, or I'll block your door every day." However, at this moment, Grim was hiding underground and vomiting blood. His opponent's powerful attack had really hurt him. If he had not reacted quickly and tried his best to sneak deeper underground, he would have been kicked out of the battle. Even so, just the huge tremors from the pressure of the ground made him vomit 3 liters of blood, and he almost fell to the ground. Moving quickly in the dark underground, Grim used the narrow space created by the native magic puppet to quickly treat his injuries. Only then did he throw out the new magic puppet that he had painstakingly obtained last night with a ferocious expression. He then controlled the magic crocodile hunter to slowly float upwards. As expected, Mark had long been prepared for Grim's sneak attack. The leather boots on his feet were obviously a little strange. They could emit strange magical waves that made the ground beneath him as hard as a rock, thus blocking all the earth element spells cast by the magic crocodile hunter. In the end, Thunder Axe Mark simply sat cross-legged in the field and shouted with disdain, "Kid, from now on, your underground attacks are useless against me. If you still want to fight, then come out. If you want to waste time, then I'll accompany you. I don't believe that your puppet life forms can last that long underground." Before he finished speaking, Mark suddenly stood up and once again grabbed the battle axe in his hand. Less than 100 meters away from him, the magic crocodile hunter slowly floated to the surface. Grim's cold eyes were staring at him. "Kid, at least you know what's good for you. Today I, Mark, will teach you what it means to fight." With that, Mark's body was once again covered in blue electric arcs. He swung his battle axe and roared as he rushed forward. "Didn't you always want to see my methods? All right, I'll show you now." Grimson sneered, raised his hands, and shouted, "Come out, my berserker." Chapter 68. At this moment, the entire field really collapsed. In the middle of the field between Mark and Grimm, a large area of the ground suddenly began to crack and collapse, then sank into a terrifying pit. And in the center of the pit, waves of mud rolled and earth energy filled the air. A huge figure was slowly rising up. Mark, who was about to charge forward, had no choice but to stop. He looked at the terrifying figure that emerged from the smoke and dust with a solemn expression. The first thing that came into view was a pair of strange scarlet eyes. Then, one could see its body that was made of hard rock. The triangular serpent head, made of diamond, seemed indestructible. There was a thin crack at the front of its snout. Those with sharp eyes could see that this giant serpent made of rocks had not a single snake tongue or fangs missing. Behind the snake's head was a strange snake body made up of countless large and small rocks. They overlapped with each other and formed the terrifying ring-shaped body of the rock python. Because only a part of the huge snake body emerged from the smoke and dust, the rest was still hidden in the thick and dense soil, so it was difficult to see the whole picture. But even so, from the ground to the top of the snake head, Mark estimated that it was 12 meters tall. If its body was really made of underground rock with high metal composition, then its terrifying weight and indestructible body alone would be a nightmare for most enemies. Such a terrifying rock python was also that guy's puppet. Before this thought could finish in his mind, the super rock python had already opened its mouth and launched a long-range sandstorm at Mark. A large amount of soil and sand was extracted from the end of its body and shot out from the snake's mouth through the pipe-like ring-shaped snake body. It was like a wall of mud slapping at Mark. It was obvious that the rock serpent did not filter the mud carefully when it extracted it. A lot of dry twigs, grass, plant residues, and countless underground insects, gophers, earthworms, and other things could be seen in the mud pillar that it spat out. Faced with such an indiscriminate attack, Mark instantly felt a headache coming on. He roared and gathered all the power of lightning in his body in front of him, condensing into a large lightning net that barely protected him. The fine lightning net collided with the oncoming mud pillar, producing a sizzling sound that echoed throughout the field. A pungent burning smell began to spread in the field. Just as Mark gathered all the strength in his body to resist the sandstorm of the rock python, the people at the edge of the field suddenly cried out, "Be careful! Quick! Defend!" Mark's vision was blocked by a large amount of splashing soil, and he could not clearly see the situation behind the mud pillar. However, his powerful battle instincts and rich battle experience allowed him to raise the battle axe in front of his chest in a split second. Puff! With a muffled sound, the lightning net shattered into pieces. A terrifying and tough triangular-shaped snake head passed through the waves of mud and smashed through the electric net. It suddenly opened its mouth and bit down on Maka's battle axe. Bang! With an earth-shattering boom, the rock python closed its giant mouth and bit the thunder axe with its fangs, which were made up of small rock peaks. Using the violent momentum, the rock python slammed the thunder axe into the distance. If it were any other high-ranking apprentice, they might have been smashed into pieces and turned into mud. However, Mark was a rare physique training apprentice in the camp, and his strength was second only to the quasi-wizard bald Afu. Therefore, as he roared continuously, the bones in his entire body emitted explosive crackling sounds under the stimulation of his violent fighting strength. The muscles in his body began to expand continuously, and countless snake-like thick blood vessels crazily twisted and drilled under the iron like solid muscles. Mark bent his legs slightly and kicked back, forming a bow shape. In an instant, his thickened arm tightly gripped the battle axe and forcibly withstood the full force of the rock python's charge. However, although he withstood it, the ground under his feet could not. Maka's body kept moving backward as the rock serpent charged forward. His legs that were as thick as stone pillars split open the solid ground, pushing out a mound of dirt behind him that kept growing higher and higher. When the power of the rock python's attack was exhausted, Mark's body had already been pushed back more than 20 meters, and the pile of soil behind him had almost covered his sturdy body. His lower body had completely sunk into the soil. You've used up all your strength, haven't you? Then let's see what I can do next. Mark, who was bowing his head, suddenly raised his head and looked at the terrifying snake head that was biting down on the battle axe. He roared with anger in his chest. Mark suddenly used his strength to shake off the rock python. Taking advantage of the gap when the snake head slightly retreated, he jumped up and fiercely chopped at the rock python's eyebrows with both hands. Dong, dong, dong. The huge sound of iron being forged rang out again. The rock python, which was 2 meters thick and made of pure diamond, was unexpectedly pushed back by Mark's fierce attacks. A huge amount of rock fragments, sand poured down like a waterfall. The muscles on the faces of the onlookers and Grim, who was in the middle of the field, were twitching. They could only watch a less than 3 meters tall giant madly beating up a rock monster that was like a giant to him. If the rock python was really a living creature, its skull would have been smashed and its bones broken. However, it was not a living creature after all. It was a rock monster controlled by a summoning crystal, so this little bit of damage was not enough to kill it. Therefore, under Grimm's remote control, the rock serpent thrashed its body in a frenzy, stirring up a towering mud pillar beside it. Its body then retreated into the smoke, preparing for the next violent attack. How could Maku, who was in high spirits, let out a violent roar and condensed a crackling lightning storm around his body to act as a protective shield? He arched his body and charged into the smoke and dust. In the midst of the chaos, he once again began to frantically wrestle with the rock python. A huge amount of dust rose into the air, and it could no longer be stopped. The wantonly dust obstructed the onlooker's vision. The violent and chaotic earth elements and the randomly splashing lightning storm also blocked the onlookers' spiritual senses, making it difficult for them to spy on the real situation in the center of the battlefield. Only the occasional rolling rock fragments and the sudden explosion of lightning allowed the onlookers to indirectly experience the brutality of the battlefield. Grim, who was also outside of the battlefield, was riding on the demon crocodile hunter. It was obvious that he could perceive the situation in the battlefield more clearly than the onlookers. Under his command, the Aborigine hunter's continuous mud spears and his flame spears would cause great damage to the person in the smoke and dust. Through the pillar of dust, the furious roars coming from within were the greatest proof. Such an earth-shattering monster battle had obviously brought an indescribable shock to the onlookers. Countless pairs of eyes of different colors and shapes stared at Grim. The previous disdain, contempt, and disregard had turned into solemn, scrutinizing, and astonished gazes. Damn it, he's just a junior apprentice. Even he could fight with the axe of Thunder Mark to this extent. Although he was not fighting personally, the summoned creatures were still a part of a wizard apprentice's strength. Put yourself in Mark's shoes and imagine if the one fighting was not the thick-skinned and powerful Mark, but yourself. Many of the camp's elites had a pained and conflicted look in their eyes, even though he was unwilling to admit it. If it were him, he might really have been overthrown by a junior apprentice, unable to turn the tables. This rock python was too much of a bug. Perhaps on its own, its strength was already not inferior to that of a high-level body refinement apprentice. If one were to consider its terrifying rock armor and fearless attacks, even the quasi-magi present would not be willing to fight against such an enemy. Just when everyone was in a state of confusion, following an earth-shattering explosion, Mark, who had transformed into a muscular giant, flew out like a cannonball and fell heavily on the ground. The onlookers were shocked and hurriedly looked at Mark. Immediately, they found countless terrifying injuries on Mark's body. Mark's left arm was bent and twisted. Only his right arm was still intact, and he could barely hold a battle axe. The battle axe, which was made of a variety of special alloys, was also twisted and deformed. The broad surface of the axe was full of deep scratches and bite marks. Like Tomahawk, Mark's body was also riddled with scars. When he stood up from the ground while laughing savagely, scarlet blood sprayed out from the wounds on his body at the same time, dyeing most of his body red. On his cheek, there was a horrifying scratch from the corner of his left eye to the right cheek, almost splitting his face into two. The wound had already turned brown, and it was obvious that an excessive amount of earth element had seeped into it. If these earth elements were not expelled, it would be very difficult for him to recover from such an injury, even with his high constitution and strong self-healing ability. Cough, cough. Good boy. Mark stood still and kept vomiting blood. This guy is really strong. If I didn't make a mistake and replace a few auxiliary wizard tools with this garbage, you wouldn't have taken advantage of me today. Cough, cough. The dust column parted, and a huge snake head stretched out from inside. Everyone's eyes narrowed. The situation of this rock python was not much better than Mark the Thunder Axe. Only a third of the huge snake head, which was the size of a human house, was left. The crushed parts of the rock python's skull were still continuously falling. The entire surface of the snake's head was covered with black burn marks left by the lightning strikes. Many parts of the rock had melted and flowed down like hot wax. In the middle of the broken rock python's skull, under the cover of layers of diamond rocks, an egg-sized summoning crystal was faintly discernible. However, although the rock python's injuries were serious, it was still able to move freely, attack, and defend. Some of the onlookers with good eyesight could even see through the cracks in the snake's body that large amounts of earth element wrapped in rocks and sand were surging inside the rock python's ring-shaped body, continuously healing the damage on the surface. Even the huge hole in the snake's head was healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Chapter 69. Although Grimm secretly admired Berserk Mark, he didn't let his guard down at all when he saw Berserk Mark, who was still standing firm. Clumps of yellow smoke gathered at the badly damaged snake head. Using the diamond rock extracted from underground as the material and the sticky earth element as the adhesive, it only took a few blinks of an eye to wrap up the exposed summoning crystal core. Just as it finished healing itself, the terrifying rock python once again raised its body high, coiling its body into a snake formation, and suddenly shot out. It opened its mouth wide, revealing its fangs. Rocks crisscrossed, and its target was the Axe of Thunder, Mark, who could not even stand straight. The distance of less than 30 meters could be covered in an instant. But just as the terrifying rock python was about to bite down, an even taller and more ferocious human figure suddenly appeared in front of Mark. They had the same body of flesh and blood and the same strong muscles and bones. This tall man only slightly clenched his fist and lightly struck the mouth of the rock python. The rock python that was fighting a bloody battle with Ku just a moment ago was instantly torn into pieces, and rocks and dirt were sent flying everywhere. There seemed to be a transparent barrier around the tall human figure, preventing any of the rocks and soil from getting close to him. However, he stood as steady as a mountain amidst the flying rocks and soil. He even had the strength to slowly retract his right fist and grab at the air in the depths of the soil. With a soft puff, the summoning crystal core that was mixed in the soil was wrapped up by a strong force and flew straight into his palm. The tall human figure raised his right hand and carefully examined the bright crystal core in his hand under the bright sunlight. The surface of the crystal core, which was originally brown and transparent, was densely engraved with countless tiny magic arrays that were as tiny as mosquitoes and flies. Magic runes that were filled with a strong aura of earth element lit up one after another, forming a three-dimensional miniature magic array in front of his eyes. To be honest, he could clearly see the runes that were 100 times thinner than a strand of hair, and he could roughly identify each magical rune that appeared and disappeared. But when he put all these together, Fu could only rub his bald head in annoyance. He could not understand how they were able to project strands of earth elemental energy and construct such a powerful and ferocious elemental puppet. Fu could only sigh inwardly that he did not have much talent in the field of spell formations, but he could not understand the core of the spell formation. At this time, Grimm had already rushed forward on his magic crocodile, looking at him anxiously. Fu casually threw the summoning crystal core back to Grimm and said with a look of disdain, "Look at how nervous you are. Don't tell me I'll break it just by looking at it. All right. Today's battle is considered your victory. I admit defeat on behalf of Mark. You can go and collect your spoils of war." Grim hurriedly caught the summoning crystal core and immediately raised it up to his eyes to examine it. He was also worried that the overly strong recoil would damage the weak spell formation on the crystal core after the repeated and violent attacks. Fortunately, under the careful examination of the AI chip, the summoning crystal core that could summon terrifying rock pythons from underground was still in good condition. Only then did Grim relax a little. Grim didn't dare to raise any objections to Afu's interference. The leader of the training camp could have easily stopped the fight, but he chose to use such a violent and rough method to destroy the stone body of the rock python. Grim would not believe that he did not intend to intimidate the enemy. It seemed like his performance today was too eye-catching, forcing the camp boss to use this kind of method to warn Grim to stop. He used the most gentle method to show Grim that he wasn't a pushover. However, the power that Afu displayed just now had truly shaken Grim's heart. Grim sensed that Leyland was different from other apprentices, possessing extreme physical strength and complete control over his power. It was said that the prospective sorcerers were a group of people closest to the sorcerer community. Could it be that this characteristic was the source of the sorcerer apprentice qualitative change? Grim lowered his head silently and carefully etched this moment into his heart so that he could analyze it in the future. "I can't believe we all underestimated you." Afu supported Mark, who was on the verge of collapsing, with one hand. "Looks like you've placed most of your power on the puppet creature. It's a great help to increase your power in a short period of time. Come with me. A talent like you is what our camp needs. I'll see if I can find a suitable position for you." After saying this, he turned around and dragged Mark to a tall wooden house in the distance. Grim rubbed his nose and could only smile bitterly as he followed Afu. The crowd was silent. Their expressions were complicated and flickering. It was obvious that they still could not accept this result. There were even a few high-ranking apprentices who had mournful expressions on their faces, as if their parents had died. When Afu passed by the crowd, he suddenly stopped and turned around to stare at Blackwood, who had a gloomy expression on his face. "Hey, stupid head, why did you bet on Grim?" Blackwood pulled up his hood again and covered his skeleton-like face. His cold words floated out from the shadows. "Mark's victory shows that I'm useless. Isn't this better? Who still dares to say that I lost because I'm useless?" Afu opened his mouth wide and howled for a long time, but he could not think of anything to say. Damn it, although this kid's answer was sinister, it was 100% true. It made him, the boss of the camp, angry, but unable to find a reason to act out. "What about you? Why did you do it?" Afu looked at Kevin this time. "This kid said he was confident on the way here, and I'm poor. That's why I wanted to take a gamble." Kevin's answer was also very direct. Afu's mouth gurgled for a long time, but he finally gave up on the idea of finding someone to vent his anger on. "You two lucky kids. How come I didn't know about this beforehand?" Go get your rewards." "Hey, kid over there, come with me. I'll treat you to a meal." Afu said he would treat them to a meal, and he really did. Unlike the usual formalities, when Afu led Grim and the injured Mark to a large wooden table in the wooden house, a group of muscular humans walked in one after another, carrying a heavy box of food. In front of Grim was an exquisite silver tray. The patterns on it were simple and elegant, and the words carved on it were quite mysterious. However, Grim did not have the slightest interest in exploring it. Instead, he stared blankly at the thick piece of roasted meat on the tray. This piece of roasted meat weighed at least 2 kilograms, and traces of blood and smoke could still be seen on it. Beside the tray was a large cup of viscous liquid that was as red as blood. When he sniffed it, a nauseating smell assaulted his nose. "Eat." Baldy Afu's smile was deep and sinister. "I rarely treat people to a meal. Don't tell me you won't even give me this little bit of face." It was strange that Mark, who was seriously injured and needed to find a quiet place to treat his injuries, actually struggled to climb onto the long table. The bloody ribs in front of him weighed no less than 10 kilograms. As for the wine cup used to accompany the meal, it was simply a copper bowl. Grim looked at the host, Afu. The plate in front of him was a piece of half-cooked animal rib. Judging from the bloody shape, it looked like it had just been cut from a large carnivorous beast. The A.I. chip in Grim's mind sent in the answer. Earth Fire Dragon. This was the ribs of an Earth Fire Dragon. Earth Fire Dragons were a type of large wyvern that lived in the depths of the lava. They had a trace of dragon blood in them, but they did not have the terrifying strength of giant dragons. As they liked to devour underground sulfur and dragon fruits, they were also a type of fire-type magic beast. While Grim was still hesitating, Mark had already started to chew on the ribs. He threw the large silver knife to the ground and tore it with his hands. He did not care about the fishy smell of the ribs and swallowed it in big mouthfuls. This baldy Afu would not harm him with this. After scanning the ribs with the A.I. chip and finding no problems, Grim picked up the knife and tried to cut it. He did not notice it earlier, but when he picked up the knife, he discovered that this unassuming silver knife was actually a magic weapon. It was enchanted with the effects of armor penetration and sharpness. The silver fork in his other hand had the effects of piercing and toughening. Damn, a knife specially used to cut meat. Its enchantment was much better than the defensive magic weapons of most intermediate acolytes. Grim could not help but sigh inwardly. The difference between acolytes was actually so great. With a sigh, Grim finally managed to cut a small piece of meat with great difficulty and put it in his mouth with the silver fork. To be honest, after the first bite, Grim could not bear the bitter taste and almost spat it out. He chewed with all his might until his cheeks were a little sore. Only then did he swallow it with difficulty. As soon as the shredded meat entered his stomach, a warm feeling rose from his lower abdomen. Even his entire body reacted to the heat. Grim's body seemed to have fallen into a state of extreme hunger, and a strong desire to eat was teasing his will. What's wrong with me? AI. Chip, begin dynamic body scan. Beep. Dynamic body scan will now begin. Fire origin force detected. Body rapidly absorbing. Correspondingly, in front of Grim's eyes was a dynamic test table. Both his constitution and spirit began to increase slowly but steadily. Although the increase was usually to 3 or 4 decimal places, it was still a slow increase. Grim's eyes suddenly lit up. Nutrition. Chapter 70. The Terra Dragon's meat was sour and tough. Even though the piece of meat in front of Grim was already cooked, it was still extremely difficult for him to swallow it. Grim turned around and looked at the other two who were happily munching on the meat. He even suspected that they had enchanted their teeth with tear and pierce. Otherwise, how could they chew on the meat that was much tougher than rhinoceros skin? Grim ate slowly, but he was determined, especially when he immersed part of his mind in his mind and watched his vitality and spiritual force slowly increase. He became even more determined to eat. However, this was something that only he could do. After all, it was not possible for an ordinary person to detect the 3 or 4 decimal points of a person's body. After eating one piece, another piece came up. The total volume of the 2 pieces of meat was definitely more than 3 times the size of his stomach, but he still chose to swallow them. In the end, he had no time to savor the taste of the meat. Instead, he forced himself to put the meat in his mouth and swallow it with all his might. Every piece of meat, as it slid down his esophagus, emitted an elemental aura that made Grim's body and mind feel happy. It was the smell of fire elemental particles. Normally, if Grim wanted to increase his spiritual force, he could only rely on meditation for 4 hours a day and constantly absorb the fire elemental particles in the space in his spiritual world. This process usually increased the upper limit of his spiritual force. It was like the spiritual sea was a pond with a boundary. Daily rest was just a process to refill the pond, but meditation could expand the boundary of the pond. In Grimm's previous understanding, other than meditation, the only way to increase the upper limit of spiritual force was to take a special spiritual force potion. But today's food, made him understand that apart from meditation and potions, there was another way to slowly increase the quality of a wizard apprentice's body. Although taking a large amount of potions could increase spiritual force quickly, it would usually damage the other attributes of the body. However, food could slowly and gradually increase spiritual force. The benefits it brought to the apprentice were similar to meditation, but there was only benefit and no harm. At the very least, Grimm had heard that the spirit concentration potion he had just obtained would increase his mental strength at the cost of his physique. Therefore, such a potion could not be consumed in large quantities within a short period of time. Otherwise, Grimm would definitely turn into a skeleton like Blackwood. While thinking about the combination of food and concentration potion, a piece of meat was stuck in Grimm's throat. He could neither spit it out nor swallow it, so he could only drink the blood-red liquid in one gulp. Like a line of fire flowing through his mouth and esophagus, Grimm's face instantly turned red, and the skin under his delicate face swelled up to the point where it looked like it was about to drip blood. This is the blood of the Earth Fire Dragon. The fire elements contained in the Earth Fire Dragon's flesh and blood were constantly being released, absorbed and fused by the abnormally hungry body. When Grimm swallowed the last piece of meat, he finally could not hold it anymore and collapsed on the table. His consciousness was being roasted by the large amount of fire elements, and his consciousness was starting to blur. Hee kid, this is the first truth I'll teach you. Before he completely lost consciousness, Grimm vaguely heard Ah Fu's coarse voice that was getting farther and farther away. An apprentice must first eat, then you can fight. Remember it well. He couldn't remember what the other party had said after that. The fire elemental energy that exploded in his body was like boiling lava that flowed and drilled on its own. It surged through every vein and tendon in his body without a care in the world. The overly dense fire elements made his skin look fiery red. Grimm's skin felt hot to the touch, like a human furnace that was full of firepower. These powerful fire elements were extremely suitable for human absorption. A large amount of them gathered and attacked every inch of Grimm's muscles, bones, and flesh. The fire elements kept fusing into Grimm's body, bathing his muscles, bones, and flesh in a gluttonous feast of fire elements. Grimm was drunk. He was drunk from the fire elements. The next time Grimm woke up, it was already 17 hours later. The time was very precise, and there were no mistakes. This was the number calculated by the AI chip. When Grimm woke up, he found himself sprawled out on a piece of felt, and the felt was placed in a small tent for a single person. The moment he woke up, Grimm felt like he was about to explode. A feeling of fullness, which he had never experienced before, drowned most of his consciousness. Grimm felt that his limbs were trembling, every bone and every piece of flesh was cheering, and they were all eager to give it a try. This was the first time he had eaten so much that he was so full that he couldn't wait to stand up and fight someone to vent the endless and violent power in his body. Hey, Chip, what's wrong with me? Why do I have such a strange feeling? Grimm had always been a cool-headed person who was more rational than anything else. He was not used to this abnormal impulse today. Beep. It has been detected that all bodily functions of the host body have reached their current upper limit. There is also a large amount of bioactive elements that have yet to be completely absorbed in various parts of the body. The abnormal feeling of the host body stems from the stimulation of these bioactive elements. It is recommended that the host body immediately practice fire spells to absorb and volatilize these bioactive elements. F***CK. It turns out that my body's endurance is too low. I'm weak and can't handle the nourishment. I can't take it anymore because of that nourishing food. Grimm jumped up from the felt. He clenched his fist lightly, and he could feel an explosive force gathering in his arm, giving him the illusion that he had become a physique refinement magus. He opened the tent door and walked out. Only then did Grimm realize that he was still in the training camp. However, he had been thrown from the wooden hut in the east to the tent in the west. With his sharp and agile senses, he could clearly sense that some of these tents were empty, while others were still sleeping or meditating inside. It should be the morning of the second day, and many of the camp's elites were diligently practicing their spells at the edge of the spacious field. Seeing them skillfully and naturally performing sentence spellcasting, Grimm could not help but be eager to give it a try. Sentence spellcasting was actually an ability that matured spellcasters had. When a spell reached a certain level of proficiency, acolytes could try to reduce or omit parts of the incantation, but still maintain the consistency of the spellcasting. The ultimate goal of this painstaking practice was to achieve the goal of instantaneous casting. Some powerful magi did not even need to chant tens or even hundreds of incantation syllables. Instead, they only needed to use a few short sentences to trigger the incantation. However, in order to compress an incantation with hundreds of syllables to the point where it could be activated with 5 or 6 syllables, the spellcaster would need to work tirelessly over a long period of time, as well as some secret magic inheritance. The reason why a Magus family was so important to an acolyte was because every Magus family would have their own unique magic inheritance. Only when one belonged to a family would one have the qualifications to enjoy the magic skills and methods passed down by countless magi seniors. This would allow one's witchcraft path to become smoother and more convenient. Otherwise, without the help of these ancient knowledge, one would have to rely on oneself for everything. Even if one had great talent in witchcraft, it would be a waste of precious time. Take Grimm, for example. If he chanted more than a third of the syllables, he would have entered an irreversible witchcraft shaping process. Once this process was interrupted or he gave up, he would have to bear a certain degree of witchcraft backlash. On the other hand, the acolytes with the inheritance were like cheaters. They knew where to stop, how to stop halfway, and how to avoid the backlash. Even if Grimm practiced hard for dozens of years, he would not be able to figure this out. This was the advantage of knowledge inheritance. The acolytes with the ability to cast spells freely could practice witchcraft as they pleased. When the witchcraft was about to be activated, they could easily dispel it. Relying on this kind of repeated practice, their proficiency in witchcraft continued to increase. One had to know that a sorcerer apprentice only had so much spiritual force. If they didn't have the ability to cast spells, or cast spells freely, they could only run back to sleep to recover their spiritual force after casting a dozen or so spells. They cannot practice hundreds of times a day like now. Therefore, the learning speed of acolytes with the inheritance was like the difference between heaven and earth compared to a wild child like Grimm. However, Grimm did not have the time to be envious of them. Instead, he ran to the corner of the training ground and found a boulder to use as a target. He began to cast his newly solidified witchcraft, Flame Spear, over and over again. Unlike the calm and serene spellcasting practice, Grimm's spellcasting practice was like a mad bombardment. Flaming spears that looked like burning javelins appeared in his hands as he chanted loudly. With a whoosh, they crossed a distance of nearly 100 meters and exploded on the boulder. The swift and violent physical attacks, coupled with the explosive power of the flame burst, submerged the boulder in a sea of violent flames. The deafening explosions simply did not stop for a moment. Normally, with Grimm's 9 points of spiritual force, he would be able to cast 4 flame spears in a row without any problems. But today, for some reason, violent and ferocious fire origin force continuously surged out of his limbs and bones. His spiritual force seemed to be on the verge of exploding. Chapter 71. Countless acolytes with dark circles under their eyes snarled as they crawled out of their tents, loudly cursing their unscrupulous comrade. But when they saw the young figure playing happily in front of the boulder, they could only wave their arms angrily and crawl back into their tents while mumbling. Soon after, countless colorful witchcraft lights lit up on many tents. Those who desperately needed sleep could only use spells to shield themselves from the outside world's interference and continue their sweet dreams. After spending half an hour, Grimm panted as he exhausted his mental strength to an extremely low level. His sharp senses told him that there was still a steady stream of fire source force being released from the depths of his muscles, bones, and flesh, soothing, and replenishing his mental strength. It was just that this process was much smoother than it was at the beginning, and it was already within the limits of his mental strength. "How are you feeling? Do you feel better now?" A deep voice suddenly sounded from behind him. Grim turned around. It was Kevin the Black Hand. "Do you know how many people in the camp are envious of you for stuffing yourself with food yesterday?" Kevin crossed his arms, an indecipherable smile on his face. "It's that Earth Fire Dragon feast from yesterday. It's something that many people in the camp dream of but can't get their hands on. Being treated to a meal by Afu is even more delightful than returning victorious from the underground world. That meat must be very expensive, right?" Grim scratched his head. "Expensive? It's not too expensive. On the market, a fresh Earth Fire Dragon steak is only 100 magical crystals per kilogram, and a cup of dragon blood is only 200 magical crystals." Although Kevin sounded relaxed, Grim had a feeling that Kevin was gnashing his teeth in anger. Grim was no longer a greenhorn who did not understand the ways of the world. He could now clearly estimate the significance of the mana crystal. For a trial apprentice like him who was here to carry out a simple underground exploration mission, he could only earn around 5 contribution points and 10 magic crystals from each trip. For an elite apprentice like Kevin, he could earn around 10 contribution points and 30 to 40 magical crystals from an underground mission. After deducting the basic expenses of purchasing materials and necessities, an elite apprentice with 200 to 300 magic crystals would be considered a wealthy person. Otherwise, why would there be so many elite apprentices gnashing their teeth at Grim, looking as if they wanted to eat him alive? It could be said that Grim had practically squeezed out all the magical crystal reserves of the elite apprentices in the training camp after the 2 duels. If it wasn't for Baldy Afu's protection, the moment he stepped out of the camp, there would have been countless acolytes waiting to ambush him. Even though he had obtained such a large amount of ill-gotten gains, Grim's face still began to twitch when he heard the true price of the Earth Fire Dragon's flesh. After suppressing it for a long time, Grim finally couldn't help but roar at the sky. "If I knew this thing was so expensive, yesterday, I definitely... You won't dare to touch it? You must eat more." After joking around for a while, when the 2 of them looked at each other again, there was a hint of intimacy between their brows. In fact, from the first day they met, Grim had been in awe of these elite acolytes who had been tempered by life and death situations. Even though he had already defeated 2 reputable apprentices in a row, it was still just a duel in the arena. If the duel was not restricted by the rules of the duel and the sorcery used, Grim's strength as a junior acolyte was still too weak. He was only strong in the support magic puppets, and his main body was too weak. If he and Hey Moo were to be thrown into a forest deep in the mountains, then Hey Moo, who was proficient in curses and sorcery, would have thousands of ways to toy with him. If his opponent was Kevin, Grim wouldn't even know how he died. He couldn't hide underground for the whole day, and he had to return to the surface to eat, drink, and sleep. And the moment he relaxed his mind might be the moment when the enemy would quietly take his life. Hence, even though his battle prowess had gained the recognition of most people, Grim still knew his limits. He might be able to pose a threat to some of the people in the camp, but it was not enough to kill them. This was why the members of the camp accepted him with a more tolerant attitude. If Grim was really fooled by the false aura of the 2 duels and wanted to associate with them as a strong person, he would only receive endless hostility and resentment. Hence, when Kevin showed a trace of goodwill, Grim immediately returned it with 10 times more enthusiasm. Kevin was much older than Grim, but he was only 27 or 28 years old, which was still considered a young man. Hence, there was not much of a gap between the 2. After exchanging a few words, Kevin tossed Grim an old cloth sack. "This is the bet you won yesterday. I was afraid that it would be inconvenient for you to carry it, so I gave you most of it to exchange for magic crystal cards. You can exchange them at the Magus Tower stations in the scattered forest of towers. This is much more convenient than carrying a few thousand magic crystals around." Grim was overjoyed when he heard this and thanked him profusely. "What's there to be grateful for? I should be thanking you. If not for you, I wouldn't have been able to earn a small sum of money yesterday. Haha, seeing those fellows' faces turn green, I can't even imagine how satisfying it was. Grim rubbed his hands, not knowing how to reply. It was good that he got along with Kevin, but he seemed to have offended even more people. Don't worry, Afu has already spoken. From now on, you are part of my group. You might not know about this, because when Afu said all this, you were already carried out of the wooden house. Kevin could not help but laugh. But amidst the mockery, Grim could still hear the envy in his voice. Brother Kevin, I wonder if you can tell me about the powers and responsibilities of the camp's acolytes. Haha, of course. Come, I'll bring you back to the Magus Tower. On the way, I'll introduce you to the training camp. Hence, when Grim returned to the Magus Tower with this huge sum of money, he finally understood the purpose of the training camp. The training camp, as its name suggested, was a training camp for elite acolytes. However, it was also a place where the interests of a small Magus family were gathered. The name Gloomy Crypt not only referred to the dark and deep underground world, but also the vast forests and rich resources within a radius of 30,000 miles around the Krila Mountains. This was also one of the areas with the most profits in the entire Dagon region. The rank 2 Magus stationed by the scattered Magus Association in the Gloomy Crypt lived in seclusion in the Magus Tower and rarely showed his face. As long as it was not a major incident where the fallen sorcerers fought their way out of the surface, he would not care about the things here. He was only obsessed with his own witchcraft experiments. Although he would occasionally sneak into the depths of the underground, it was mostly to gather knowledge and resources for his experiments. He rarely participated in the battle between the surface magi and the fallen magi. Hence, the 17 rank 1 magi who controlled the Gloom Crypt Magus Tower were the ones who called the shots in this place. Behind each of them stood an influential Magus family in the Dagon region. If these Magus families were placed in front of the scattered Magus Association in the scattered Magus Tower, they would only be considered as small Magus families. However, in this Dagon region, they were the local tyrants. Ordinary human nobles and merchant guilds could only rely on their protection to get a share of the profits here, constantly usurping the rich profits from the Krila Mountains. Medicinal ingredients, wood, special plants, fur, magical beast crystal cores, mysterious monsters. As long as you could think of it, you could find it here. Countless hunting groups and exploration groups were shuttling between the high mountains and deep valleys of Krila Mountain, bringing back precious resources and bringing the most generous returns to their sponsors. However, these were only low-end resources. What really made the Magus families rich were the magic materials produced in the subterranean world. Dark grass, ghost mushroom, night-eye stone, and other magic materials that even official magi were interested in were the main reasons why the Magus families had been prosperous for hundreds of thousands of years. Ordinary people did not have the ability to go deep into the underground to collect these resources. Only these mysterious people, sorcerer apprentices, had the ability to pass through the territory of the underground creatures and bring back these rare and enviable resources from specific areas. The 17 resident magi in the Sorcerer Tower represented the 17 leading Magus families in the Dagon region. As long as they existed, they represented that the resources of the Magus families were not allowed to be touched by outsiders. However, as official magi, of course, they would not do those rough and time-consuming tasks. Hence, the apprentices selected from the family to complete the tasks in their place. This way, not only could they ensure the continuity of the family's interests, but they could also train some of the best of the younger generation. Hence, this training camp came into being. If the 17 magi in the Sorcerer Tower were the representatives of the Magus families, then the elite apprentices in this training camp were the thugs of the Magus families. Once something happened that harmed the interests of their families, they would be the executors to protect the interests and reputation of the families. Of course, if the exploration teams sent or funded by the families found rare magical beasts or monsters in the Krila Mountains that they could not handle, the apprentices stationed here would also have to contribute their strength to provide powerful magic support for the exploration teams. However, The main focus of these elite apprentices was still in the dark crypt. Chapter 72. The existence of the Dark Crypt was of great significance to many wizard families in the Dagon region, so elite apprentices like Grimm were the most popular targets for them to recruit. First of all, recruiting these outsiders would not have too much of an impact on their inherent interests. How could an acolyte without the support of a family dare to openly offend those official sorcerers? Therefore, the elite acolytes that were roped in would only become their most capable fighters. They could not take advantage of the situation and become their competitors. Secondly, the underground world wasn't peaceful either. The rare resources that the Magi on the surface urgently needed were also the targets of the underground bastards. Therefore, every expedition and harvest in the underground was the beginning of a chaotic war between the two sides. Due to the long period of exploration and development, the rare underground resources have been discovered and marked in the form of resource points by both sides. Both sides knew when each resource would mature and when it needed to be harvested. Therefore, around these resource points, every harvest was a bloody battle to the death. In this battle, neither side would send out an official wizard. The scale of the battle was limited to apprentices. Only the winner of the battle was qualified to enter the resource point to harvest. As for the losers, they would either escape with injuries or lose their lives. Such bloody battles have been going on in the Dark Crypt for more than 300 years, and it had almost become an unwritten rule here. Both sides used their powerful apprentices as bargaining chips to compete for a fixed amount of resources every month. The winner would take all, and the loser would die. It was a great stage for prospective wizards to show off their skills. Now, because of Grimm's special ability, he was chosen by the training camp led by Bald Afu. Therefore, he was lucky enough to become one of the elite apprentices. This made him even busier. Apart from participating in an apprentice mission organized by the Wizard Association every 15 days, he also had to participate in the underground patrols organized by the training camp from time to time. In this way, Grimm's speed of earning contribution points would definitely be much faster than ordinary people. After getting a basic understanding of the training camp, Grimm said goodbye to Kevin and returned to his residence. After locking the door and making sure the surroundings were safe, Grimm began to remove the strange items and magic equipment on his body one by one. Noble headband, thorn armor bracelet, swift leather boots, screaming branches, gnome engineering goggles. After confirming that there were no witchcraft effects on his body, he ordered softly, "AI. Chip, begin checking my body's current condition." Beep. Mission accepted, beginning to scan the host. TSS. Slowly and meticulously, Grimm's latest body data was projected in front of him. Name, Grimm race, human attributes, strength 4. 17, agility 4. 36, constitution 4. 98, spirit 8. 42, profession, sorcerer apprentice, beginner. Health points class experience status. Healthy profession skills, scroll copying, spell reading, puppet making, basic, personal skills, burning hand, solidified, flame arrow, solidified, flame spear, solidified. Looking at the lines of data, Grimm could not help but reveal a look of joy. Compared to his previous frail body, Grimm's stats had started to rise. The most outstanding one was undoubtedly his physique, which had increased by nearly 2 points. One had to know that a month ago, Grimm's physique was only 3 points, which was considered weak among the sorcerer apprentices. Although the other 3 physical attributes didn't increase by much, they all had obvious improvements. They were no longer as stagnant as they used to be. Grimm looked through his stats and sat down on the chair. He took out a bottle of spirit concentration potion from his storage belt and held it in front of his eyes to examine it. The light blue potion gently rippled in the vulcanized bottle. Tiny blue particles could be seen in the potion. However, under the situation where the potion's aura was isolated, the AI chip could not accurately analyze the components of the potion. Grimm gently opened the bottle, and a fishy smell of the sea immediately entered his nose. Without any hesitation, Grimm swallowed the potion in one gulp. As soon as the potion entered his mouth, a light blue mist came out of his nostrils and condensed into the shape of a beautiful, finger-sized mermaid. The pocket-sized mermaid quickly withered in the air. When the illusory body was about to wither, a shrill scream suddenly sounded in the room. The scream did not last long. Soon, the mermaid's shadow disappeared along with the mist. However, the shrill voice sent a sorrowful curse into Grimm's mind. "Hey, Chip, what happened?" Beep detected the existence of the curse of flesh. Preliminary estimation is that it is a side effect of the potion. If it is dispelled, the potion's effect will be reduced. Please choose whether to use your spiritual force to dispel the curse. Grimm sighed inwardly. He had long heard that the spirit concentration potion had a strong side effect, and now it seemed that it was true. If he wanted to increase his spiritual force, he could only silently endure the curse. No, only maintain dynamic monitoring. Receive command. The potion is starting to take effect. On Grimm's body monitoring data, the string of numbers belonging to his mental strength began to rise, and at the same time, his physique also began to drop. Fortunately, the earth fire dragon's flesh that he had just eaten yesterday had given Grimm an abundance of vitality. The pain in his internal organs that felt like they were being gnawed on by thousands of ants had lessened a lot. Otherwise, he wasn't sure if he would be able to endure the pain. Feeling the excruciating pain from all over his body, the only thing that made him happy was that his spiritual force was constantly rising. Seeing that his mental strength had finally crossed 8 points and successfully rose to 9 points, Grimm grinned from ear to ear. Finally, his spiritual force stopped at 9, 27, and stopped increasing. Only then did Grimm let out a groan. "AI Chip, dispel the curse of flesh. Receive command." Beginning to release fire elemental particles. As waves of warmth flowed through his body, the aching and numbing feeling finally began to subside and completely disappeared. At this moment, Grimm's stats were Strength 4, 12, Agility 4, 36, Vitality 4, 21, and Spiritual Force 9, 27. The Spirit Concentration Potion gave Grimm a 0.85 increase in spiritual force, but at the same time, his vitality dropped by 0.77 points, and even his strength dropped by 0.05 points. Grimm stood up and moved around. Although the feeling of emptiness from the decline in vitality was still there, it was not as strong as he had expected. It seemed that the feast yesterday had brought him a lot of hidden benefits. The increase in spiritual force gave Grimm an overall increase in strength. Whether it was the agility of his thoughts or the depth of his spiritual perception, they were all greatly improved. Grimm hesitated for half a second before taking out another spirit concentration potion from his storage belt. He opened the cork and gulped it down. It was the same process and the same curse of flesh. Grimm had strong expectations as he endured the huge side effects of the potion. He tried his best to focus on the continuously rising spiritual force stats. At the same time, the AI Chip's alarm sounded. Warning: Host's damage to his flesh has exceeded 17%. Damage to his flesh has exceeded 19%. Damage to his flesh has exceeded 21%. Beep. Warning: damage to his flesh has exceeded 25%. If left alone, the host will enter a short period of weakness. Do you want to intervene? Grimm gritted his teeth and said in a deep voice, "No." The itchy pain had turned into a heart-wrenching pain. Bean-sized beads of sweat rolled down Grimm's forehead. He twisted his body in the chair in pain, but with his strong willpower, he didn't faint. If he really fainted, he would lose control of his body, and the curse of flesh would dissipate on its own. This would undoubtedly cause more damage to his vitality. Therefore, even if it was just to reduce the consumption of his vitality by 0.01 points, he had to stay awake. The degree of damage has reached 25%. The degree of damage has reached 25%. Grimm finally shouted when he sensed that his spiritual force was no longer changing. Begin expulsion. When a warm current surged in his body again, the pain finally began to subside. Grim held on to the armrest of the chair and tried to stand up twice, but he could not. His numb body no longer listened to his commands. At this moment, his body stats were finally refreshed. Strength, 402, agility, 428, vitality, 317. Spiritual force had finally broken through 10 points. From this moment onwards, Grim had the honor of becoming an intermediate acolyte. It only took him 1.5 months to go from a beginner acolyte with 8 points to an intermediate acolyte with 10 points. Back then, it took him 6 years to go from a beginner acolyte with 6 points to 8 points. The difference between having resources and not having resources could be seen at a glance. However, for this, Grim had paid a huge price. His spiritual power had risen from 927 to a small rank, but his physique had shrunk from 421 to 317. The drop was so great that it was shocking. Grim's strength had also decreased by 0.1 points, and his agility by 0.08 points. Chapter 73. Grim had been too rash when he consumed the concentration potion this time. Based on his understanding of the process, he would need to wait at least 3 to 4 days before he could consume the potion again. However, he was young and strong, and his body was in a period of rapid growth. Hence, he could not wait any longer and chose to consume the potion again. And the consequences of this were very obvious. The first time he consumed the potion, his vitality had only decreased by 0.85 points. The second time, it had decreased by 1.05 points. It was not hard to imagine that if Grim were to consume a third bottle, his points would drop by almost 2 points at once. After all, the AI chip statistics were only a representation of the body's attributes. These 4 main physical attributes were not isolated. Instead, they supported each other and influenced each other. For example, spirit and agility affected long-range accuracy and attack frequency. Spirit and strength affected reflexes and explosiveness. Vitality was the foundation of all attributes. When combined with other attributes, vitality, defense, resistance, and evasion would be affected. When Grim's vitality dropped from 498 to 317, this decrease of almost 2 points did not only decrease his vitality, but also caused his entire life system to deteriorate. Now, Grim felt as if his entire body was being hollowed out. The feeling of emptiness and hunger caused by the rapid decline of his vitality made his organs feel as if they were on fire. Unable to stand up, Grim could only ring the small bell on the wooden table. With a soundless ripple, a wooden face suddenly appeared on the surface of the blank wooden table. "Lord Grim, may I know what special service you require?" The wooden face actually spoke. "Food. I need food now. Now, immediately. May I know what grade of food you require? We have an ordinary set meal for nobles. The delicacy of the food is guaranteed to be the best among human nobles. Each set only costs 1 magic crystal. We also provide a mana set meal. The ingredients are all from the middle and high-grade magical beasts in the depths of the Krila Mountains. Each set only costs 5 magic crystals. Mana set meal. I want it immediately." "Understood. Your reservation has been accepted. Please place the payment in my mouth." As the words were spoken, the face on the wooden table suddenly opened its mouth. Grim took out 5 magic crystals from his waist pouch and placed them in the mouth of the human face. The originally solid wooden sculpture had now become a crack leading to a hidden space, swallowing the magic crystals. After the wooden face swallowed the magical crystal, it suddenly expanded and turned into a square wooden box. When the box finally exploded into countless wooden threads and returned to the wooden table, a piping hot steak on a silver tray was revealed. Exquisite silver knives and forks, fragrant fried steak, sprinkled with some red, blue, and white side dishes and delicious sauce. There was also a glass of fragrant wine on the side. Although Grim had never paid much attention to the food, he was not too picky. But today, he had no choice but to admit that meticulously matched delicacies were indeed a huge psychological and physiological compensation for sorcerer apprentices who had been immersed in their boring daily lives for a long time. Without caring about any table manners, Grim quickly devoured the steak with the ferocity of a hungry ghost. When all the steaks were in his stomach, the burning hunger from before was finally suppressed. "Hey, Chip, can you determine what meat this is?" Beep. Probability of ironclad rhinoceros 87%, violent beast 10%, gray pouch beast 2%. The AI, Chip listed out a long list, but the possibilities of the last 7 or 8 were so low that they could be ignored. Only the first few had the highest possibility. Grim licked his lips, which were still hungry, and drank the glass of wine. He could clearly sense that the mana-set meal he had just eaten was worlds apart from the earth fire dragon meat he had eaten yesterday. Moreover, the ironclad rhinoceros was most likely a mid-grade earth elemental magical beast. The elemental aura in its meat was not compatible with his elemental affinity. Although it could still provide him with a large amount of life force, it did not benefit his fire elemental aptitude. It seemed that if he wanted to supplement his life force and fire elemental aptitude at the same time, he could only choose the meat of fire elemental magical beasts, and the higher the rank, the better. Thus, under the urge of hunger, Grim rang the copper bell again. As expected, when Grim straightforwardly asked for a special dish from a fire elemental magical beast, the wooden face immediately reported a list of delicacies. Scarlet Flame Tiger, 15 magic crystals, /kg Fire Lizard, 20 magic crystals, /kg Inferno Hound, 25 magic crystals, /kg Fire, Swallowing Sparrow, 30 magic crystals, /kg. Grim closed his eyes and listened quietly, occasionally asking a few questions. Soon, he chose the dish that suited him the most, the stir-fried heart of an Inferno Hound. After paying the 25 magical crystals, the wooden face quickly devoured the remains of the previous meal and created a new set of delicacies. This time, it was not a steak but a beating heart. There seemed to be a fire source sealed in the fist-sized heart. When it first appeared, it was still red, but with a flash of the fire source, flames shot up to the roof and disappeared in an instant. When the heat gradually dissipated, a fragrant stir-fried heart of an Inferno Hound appeared in front of Grim. Grim first used a knife to make a small incision on the heart and drank the warm heart blood in one gulp. When the hot and tempting warmth flowed down his esophagus to his stomach, Grim could not help but close his eyes to enjoy it for a moment. Soon, after wolfing down the Inferno Hound's heart, he cut it into even pieces and put them into his mouth. When each piece of meat released a flood of fire elemental energy in his stomach, Grim could not help but close his eyes and open his mouth to moan. The surging fire elemental energy in his body made him sweat profusely, but also made him feel extremely comfortable. After eating 2 consecutive Inferno Dog set meals, the great damage to his physique was finally replenished by a portion, and even his spiritual force had a slight increase. Strength 404, Agility 430, Constitution 334, Mental Power, Strength 404, Agility 430, Constitution 334, Spirit. After the wooden face cleaned up the mess on the table, Grim held his round belly with both hands and moved himself onto the bed with great difficulty to begin his daily meditation. It had to be said that after the targeted nourishment, Grim's deep meditation had increased his spirit by an unprecedented 11 points. This was 3 points higher than the usual 8 points. From this, it could be seen that if he consciously increased the density of fire elemental energy in his body or around him before meditation, it could indirectly increase the efficiency of meditation. Grim ordered the AI chip to record this point, and he used his free time to analyze the meditation method that was most beneficial to him. After doing all this, Grim sighed and fell asleep. He slept until he woke up naturally. After an unknown amount of time, Grim finally woke up from his sleep, full of energy. His entire body was filled with an inexhaustible amount of energy. Of course, this was only a feeling of swelling after his energy was full. After all, his vitality was only 34 points, and his strength was only 4 points. This kind of data was not shameful for a junior acolyte, but for an intermediate acolyte, it was obviously too weak. Even if he did not walk the path of body refinement, an intermediate acolyte should still increase his strength, agility, and vitality to more than 5 points. Only then would his vitality not be a burden to his spiritual force, and he would always be in a state of abnormal development. Of course, extreme examples like the demonic worm and Blackwood were not included in this list. For those fellows, their bodies could no longer be estimated with common sense, and had turned into some other kind of constitution. The demonic worm Endic's body obviously had the miraculous effect of sharing life and damage. It was basically an unkillable cockroach. The Blackwood's constitution was even worse, but it clearly had some indescribable special effects. At the very least, Grimm's demon crocodile hunter's paralyzing gaze did not seem to have any effect during the battle. It was obvious that the demonic worm's strange constitution was immune to it. Grimm stretched his body. Just as he was about to go to the library to take a look, someone knocked on the wooden door. The person who came was Mary. When Mary, dressed in a red dress, walked proudly into the room, her eyes were filled with confusion that could not be concealed. Your spiritual force has already reached 10 points? The strange feeling that pervaded Grimm's body made Mary unable to confirm whether her senses were wrong, but this spiritual force undulation clearly belonged to an intermediate acolyte. Yes, I just broke through yesterday, right? You're here to ask about the spoils of war, right? I'll tell you a piece of good news. I sold the spoils of war without a hitch, and I even got these treasures. As he spoke, Grimm took out a bottle of spirit concentration potion from his waist pouch. Mary took this spirit concentration potion in her hands and looked at it carefully. Her face showed a look of sudden understanding, and she immediately returned it to Grimm. You can keep this thing. This low-grade potion is useless to me, but it's still useful to you. Remember, don't use it continuously. Remember to take care of your body after using it. Otherwise, your body will be in a terrible state. Grimm was slightly taken aback. Although he had thought that Mary might not care too much about these things, the fact that she had thrown the spirit concentration potion back so easily still exceeded Grimm's expectations. One had to know that spirit concentration potions could only be exchanged for 5 contribution points and 5 magic crystals in the Magus Tower. As for how precious contribution points were, anyone who had been to the underworld once would understand. Chapter 74. The darkness of the dark caverns was never calm. Because most of the areas here had only been roughly surveyed, even the indigenous races who lived in the underground world all year round did not have a completely reliable map. The underground tunnels often stretched for miles, sometimes expanding to thousands of feet wide, and sometimes shrinking so narrow that even a caveman could not squeeze through. The largest cavern hall was like a miniature version of the surface, with hills, valleys, underground rivers, and lakes. In this three-dimensional environment, most races could use the ceiling and walls of the cavern to travel freely, using natural or magical flying, levitating, or wall-walking mounts, such as giant spiders and certain types of lizards. As the only city built in the underground world by exiled sorcerers, the location of Elysium was extremely secretive. The rock layer full of special metal composition could isolate the outside world from malicious probes. Coupled with the dark creatures, puppet creatures, and subterranean aborigines that were widely spread in the dark caverns and tunnels, it was extremely difficult for outsiders to find the only way to Elysium through the countless winding tunnels without the guidance of the residents of Elysium. Some people said that the powerful fallen sorcerer of Elysium had set up a huge illusion spell formation outside the city, which could erase all traces of Elysium's existence from the deepest parts of the tunnels. This way, even if an enemy really broke into this place, they would not be able to find Elysium even if they walked through all the underground tunnels. Elysium, Cat's Ear Tavern. As the huge firestones hanging high above the cavern began to extinguish, night fell in the underground world. For the fallen sorcerers living underground, without a clear distinction between day and night, without a reference to the passage of time, their lives would become muddled, and it would be difficult to organize everything. So, continuing some of the habits of the surface, the powerful and resourceful sorcerers harvested a large number of firestones from the depths of the earth, and then used a spell formation to control the firestones to light up and extinguish according to the time pattern on the surface. Using this method, Elysium City was able to gather a large number of desperate sorcerer apprentices, making them become the first batch of residents here with unswerving loyalty. When night fell, the streets and alleys of Elysium were lit with torches and bonfires, and the entrance of the Cat's Ear Tavern was lit with dim butter lamps. Pushing open the old, dirty half-door, Langdon entered the tavern with a grim expression. As soon as he entered, he frowned at the bustling noise. It was about 7 o'clock in the evening in Elysium City, but the tavern was already crowded with all kinds of drunkards. As far as the eye could see, there were 1 or 2 representatives of all the famous races in the underworld. Of course, this was only limited to the lower levels. The residents of Blissful City were definitely not lowly creatures like the clawed terror or petrified lizards. Most of them were demi-humans or intelligent races with human-like appearances. For example, lizard men, gnolls, underground gnomes, spirit catcher, rat men. Looking at a group of large rats that looked like walking upright in front of him, looking at their furry, ugly faces, Langdon felt sick to his heart. After all, he was a pure human. Ordinary humans could not survive in Elysium, but Langdon was fearless. He even kicked the rat folk blocking his way. And the reason he could do all this was because he was a sorcerer apprentice, a quasi-sorcerer. In Elysium City, aside from the sorcerers who rarely showed their faces, a quasi-sorcerer apprentice like him was the top figure in the city. Wherever he went, countless natives of the underworld would take the initiative to make way for him. His light blue apprentice robe was embroidered with mysterious golden runes. As he walked, the rune energy glowed, adding a touch of fantasy and mystery to him. His handsome figure and elegant demeanor all gave Langdon a completely different noble temperament. Unfortunately, the once elegant Langdon's face was so gloomy that ink could almost be squeezed out. Kicking away the rat folk blocking his way, Langdon ignored their strange squeaks of protest. He strode to the counter, slammed the thick countertop, and roared, "Give me a bottle of Liehua." The noisy and bustling tavern instantly fell silent. Old John, who was leisurely wiping the wine glasses behind the counter, rolled his eyes and muttered a few words. His carrot-like hand swiped lightly and pulled out a bottle of wine from under the counter, pushing it along the smooth surface of the counter. As the cork was pulled off, a fiery aroma that was so thick that it felt like it had substance began to ripple in the crowded tavern. Countless furry faces were fiercely sniffing the aroma, and sparkling saliva began to flow uncontrollably from their mouths. Langdon, who rarely drank alcohol, panted heavily. His bloodshot eyes widened as he raised his neck and gulped down a few mouthfuls of wine. The spicy, fiery smell of alcohol instantly rushed into his internal organs. He could not help but bend over and cough loudly. Splashes of wine danced in the air. He coughed out more than half of the hard liquor he drank. The rat folk, who were wearing tattered cloth and walking on tiptoes, immediately swarmed over and crouched on the ground. They stuck out their big wet tongues and frantically licked the wine stains on the stone floor. Although they usually pretended to be human, once they encountered this kind of free benefit, they would immediately abandon their disguise and once again expose their nature as low-intelligence creatures. The management of Blissful City was too strict. Only intelligent creatures could become residents here, and they must have a human-like appearance. In order to be able to get an identity here, many rat folk, gnolls, and lizard men could only wear dirty cloth found in some garbage dump, stand up, and take strange, crooked steps to disguise themselves as demi-humans. In this small city ruled by fallen wizards, they had no means or way to make a living at all. They relied on inspecting the garbage discarded by the wizards to fill their stomachs. Of course, they could only live a more comfortable life by doing some dark business, such as petty theft. Looking at the ugly rat folk in front of him beating and biting each other for a little bit of his vomit, Langdon gritted his teeth and wished he could kill them all with acid marsh. He was an honorable apprentice who had reached the level of a quasi-wizard. How could he be reduced to the company of a group of demons and monsters like this? An indescribable sorrow and resentment made it difficult for him to dispel the anger in his chest. Langdon tilted his head back and downed the rest of the life-fire wine in one gulp. He tossed a magic crystal and staggered out of the tavern. What's wrong with Lord Langdon? Is this the first time I've seen such an abnormal behavior? In a dark corner, two shadows were quietly talking. Why, you still don't know? One of the shadows whispered. I heard something happen to his other half. Devil's Vine Lady? The other shadow suddenly exclaimed. You said something happened to the Devil's Vine Lady. Hush, hush. The first shadow paced around anxiously. Seeing that no one was paying attention to them, he warned in a low voice. You just came back from the west. You don't know the situation. The east side has been very lively these few days. I heard that a few quasi-sorcerers fought there, and even a few layers of the tunnels collapsed. You said the Devil's Vine Lady is dead? Who killed her? Who else could it be? Of course, she died at the hands of those bastards on the surface. I heard the wizards on the surface had nothing better to do, so they sent a group of apprentices here to steal our resources. The Devil's Vine Lady died at the hands of these newcomers. I heard. The shadow looked around and lowered his voice. I heard she died at the hands of a beginner apprentice called Grim. Before the black shadow could finish speaking, an earth-shattering sound drowned out its voice. The stone wall beside them was suddenly punched through by a terrifying fist, and a large hole was blasted open. A huge figure more than 3 meters tall barged in. With one hand in each hand, it forcibly picked up the two whispering fellows hiding in the shadows. The blazing stove in the tavern illuminated the figures of the two shadows. They were two gnolls. Damned lowly creatures. What right do you have to talk about me, Langdon? I hate hearing the name Grim. This is what will happen to anyone who dares to say it again. Following the angry roar of the tall figure, the power of ice and snow gathered in his palms. In a breath's time, the two gnolls were frozen into human-shaped ice sculptures. Then, the tall humanoid slammed the ice sculpture into the floor in the middle of the tavern. Even the flesh and blood inside were crushed into ice shards. You damn scum, stand up for me. I don't want anyone to mention that damn name again. If anyone can't remember this, I, Langdon, will use my death to remind them. Langdon, who had transformed into a terrifying giant, roared angrily. Grim, you damned bastard. I'll be waiting for you in the darkness of the underground. Grim was extremely busy these few days as he had no idea what was happening in the underground world. He had finished reading the books he brought from the Swamp Tower. All that was left was the accumulation of knowledge and analysis of spell models. This was the first defensive spell that Grim was about to obtain, and he was extremely enthusiastic about it. Flame Shield. This was the first defensive spell he had chosen for himself. However, in order to obtain it, Grim had to first master 4 to 5 basic subjects of witchcraft and a large amount of knowledge about witchcraft. From characteristics of fire elemental particles to regular arrangement of elemental energy, from effects of spiritual elements and spells to 100 questions on shaping Flame Shield. There were dozens of spells and techniques that Grim had to learn in advance. Although he had the AI chip to help him, it was still an arduous task to understand and master them all. However, according to the AI chip's calculations, Grim was very happy to know that he could obtain this flame shield before his next trip to the underground world. Chapter 75. Ever since he discovered that food could help a wizard apprentice adjust their bodies, the daily magic meal had become an unshakable part of his daily routine. Under his guidance, Mary quickly became a captive of delicious food and accompanied him in a frenzy of eating. If it wasn't for the fact that he needed to exercise every time after eating to help the absorption of elemental active substances, Grim would definitely have changed his meals to the magic meal. For the next few days, every morning was his unshakable time to study magic knowledge. He needed to make full use of the AI chips helped to instill a large amount of magic knowledge into his mind and then store it in a systematic way. Noon was the most important time of the day to enjoy food. The two of them tasted most of the magic set meals provided by the Magus Tower and chose the one that was most suitable for them. Grim's favorite was still the stir-fried heart and liver of a firehound, while Mary's favorite was the blood of a wyvern. The crazy expenditure of nearly 50 mana crystals per day resulted in the rapid growth of their physique. Grim's physique would increase by 0.3 every day. As for Mary, although her growth wasn't as terrifying, she was still beaming with joy and looked very satisfied. After eating the food, Mary would grab Grim and beat him up in the afternoon. In the arena, Grim became the best human punching bag and was tortured to death by Mary. Facing Mary, who was at full speed, Grim could only barely catch her flickering figure with his noble headband. If he had been just a little bit slower in controlling the flow of flames in his hands, 5 shallow wounds would have appeared on his body. In the first 3 days of the battle, Grim was covered in wounds after every battle. His body, which had just gained a bit of toughness, was now covered with claw marks, as if he had been trampled by hundreds of catgirls. Grim sadly found that without the help of magic puppets, he was simply looking for trouble by fighting Mary alone. Mary could even use the most gentle touch to reduce his life force to 1 point, but his waving fire pillars could not even touch the hem of her clothes. Previously, he could use the sudden change of direction to catch Mary off guard, but the same technique was useless against an agile witch-killer like Mary the second time. Without a suitable defensive spell, it would be impossible for Grim to defend against Mary's attacks with just the burning hand. As for why he didn't use flame arrows and flame spears, there was no need to discuss it. Even a close-range spell like the burning hand could not catch Mary, let alone the flame arrow and flame spear, which needed 3 seconds to cast a spell. In order to save some face for himself, Grim had to break his oath and secretly let the chip scan and store Mary's attacking methods and habits. He then built a small battlefield spellcasting support system. With the assistance of this system, the AI chip could capture Mary's battle stance and use its rapid calculation ability to deduce where Mary would most likely appear and where she would most likely attack. According to the AI chip's calculations, Grim finally managed to capture Mary. Unfortunately, this short-lived success had enraged Mary. Under the continuous and ferocious attacks of a red phantom, Grim did not even last for 5 seconds before he was reduced to a pile of HP. At this point, Grim could not help but admire Mary for being able to accurately attack without the help of the AI chip. This fully revealed her perfect control over her enemy's life force and her heart-wrenching savagery. The Sorcerer Tower's arena also had many exquisite designs that were hard to imagine for outsiders. Sorcerer apprentices could choose between the 2 modes of sparring and life and death duels. In the sparring mode, once an apprentice's HP fell to a dangerous level, any attack from the opponent would trigger the arena's defense mechanism, which would protect the injured apprentice in a protective barrier that was difficult for outsiders to break. However, there was no such defense mechanism in the life or death mode. Mary's brilliance lay in the fact that she could reduce Grim to a pile of HP every time without triggering the arena's defense mechanism. This was what Grim feared the most. Therefore, almost every afternoon became a painful journey for Grim to seek torture. Every time, he would be reduced to a pile of HP and dragged out of the arena by Mary. The only difference was how long he could last. On the first day, he lasted for half an hour. On the second day, he lasted for 15 minutes. On the third day, he had the chance to last longer, but because he angered Mary, he was killed in 5 minutes. On the fourth day, he lasted for half an hour. This was the most perfect coordination between him and AI chip. On the 5th day, he managed to last for an hour without any damage. This was because his flame shield had appeared. Yes, it was unexpected. Under the pressure of the terrifying Blood Queen, Mary, Grimm had mastered the prerequisite knowledge of the flame shield and successfully cast it before the start of the battle. The flame shield was a shield-shaped defense spell made of condensed elemental flames. When the spell was successfully cast, it would automatically circle 1 meter around Grimm's body and hover around his body. Its area of defense was 5 meters high and 1 meter wide. Not only did it have excellent physical and spell protection, it also had the ability to reflect damage in close combat. Mary had tried it before. She used her high agility to get close to Grimm, but her sharp claws could not break through the fire shield to attack Grimm. The seemingly small flame shield turned out to be intelligent and could automatically adjust itself to the appropriate position to block all external attacks. So far, Mary had not mastered any famous close-range combat skills. Her attacking methods were still relatively primitive. She relied more on her agility and her strong body to fight head-on. If there was any special method, it would be to use her blood wizard power on her claws, so that her attacks could absorb the enemy's blood and nourish herself. However, this kind of attack, without any powerful means, was destined to be weak. It was maintained at around 9 to 13 points each time. The Flame Shield's defense was as high as 35 points, which was not something that a normal attack from Mary could break. Therefore, once Grimm mastered the Flame Shield, he immediately turned the tide of the battle. Previously, Grimm had been struggling to defend himself, but Mary's storm-like attacks had slowly whittled him down. It would have been better if he had not tried to counterattack, as he could have lasted longer. Once he gave up on defense and tried to capture Mary's ghostly figure, he would be toyed with to death by her, and the consequences would be unspeakable. But now, with the appearance of the Flame Shield, Mary's close combat attacks had not only failed to break it, but her claws had also been burnt black by the sudden explosion of the shield. Even her red dress, which did not have any defensive spells, had a few big holes burned. It was rare for him to have the upper hand, and Grimm was overjoyed. While admiring Mary's voluptuous body, he loudly chanted the spell of Flame Arrow, using the exploding flames to chase after Mary's figure. For the first time, he no longer had to worry about having 5 claw marks that were neither deep nor shallow inexplicably appear on his body while he was in a daze. Grimm's leisurely attack had obviously enraged Mary. In the 37th second, he was once again cut down by Red Dress Mary. But this time, the arena's defense mechanism was activated. A transparent barrier shielded him from view, while Red Robe Mary was bounced back by the barrier, revealing her charred body. Grimm could not help but let out a long sigh when he saw Red Robe Mary glaring at him from behind the protective shield. This Mary was still as competitive as ever. With the strength of Mary's close combat attacks, it was impossible to break the Flame Shield, at least in theory. But when Grimm met the competitive Mary, even the AI chip's calculations became unreliable. In a fit of rage, Red Dress Mary withstood the Flame Shield's damage and did not retreat. She also withstood Grimm's Flaming Hand's double fire attack. She struck the same spot on the Flame Shield with an unimaginable triple attack, and used the method of stacking damage to break Grimm's tortoiseshell. Next, Grimm became a Spartan. The pain of elemental flames roasting flesh was not something an ordinary person could endure. Although Mary could rely on her powerful body's regeneration and lifesteal rebirth to recover, she could not avoid this painful process. She could only rely on her strong willpower to endure it. She was not willing to let Grimm overwhelm her even once in their daily training, even if it was just a little. She was actually willing to endure such great pain and torture. Her ruthlessness and stubbornness deeply moved Grimm. If he were to ask himself, he would definitely not be able to do this. Facing this strong woman who was ruthless to her enemies and even more ruthless to herself, Grimm could only write the word respect in his heart. But when he turned around, Grimm secretly gave the AI chip a new research topic: how to use spiritual force to control the Flame Shield and dodge the enemy's stacking attacks. But it was a pity that after the 5th day, Mary no longer dragged Grimm to the arena to exercise. Instead, she went to the public library of the Magus Tower and searched day and night for a way to break the elemental shield. Chapter 76. When he returned to the underground world again, Grimm was no longer as nervous as before. Instead, he was looking forward to it. All the elite apprentices in the training camp had to step on the white bones of the fallen apprentices. Therefore, if Grimm wanted to rise quickly, he had to absorb the flesh and blood of his kind to strengthen himself. After gathering in the mission hall, the team of 9 once again embarked on the dangerous journey underground. Matthew's accidental death and Leo's serious injury made the team realize how dangerous the underground world was. When they stopped at the outpost camp for a short while, they were arguing about how to complete the mission. Leo's injuries were still a burden to him. Of course, those flesh wounds had already healed, but there was still a curse deep in his heart that made him miserable. But after more than 10 days of recuperation, he finally got rid of all the curse. But it was difficult for his injured body to recover in a short period of time. Therefore, this also meant that the underground mission team this time had one less advanced apprentice, and the quasi-wizard Leo could only be used as an advanced apprentice. The lack of strength in the team made them not as brave as last time. They became more conservative and suggested to complete the mission with the whole team. Although this would take 3 or 4 times the time, it was undoubtedly the best in terms of safety. Those underground bastards probably didn't have the guts to attack a mission team with 3 prospective wizards and 5 senior apprentices. As soon as Isaac made this suggestion, most of the senior apprentices immediately responded. The flickering light from the temporary bonfire shone on the faces of every member of the team, leaving shadows on their well-defined faces. Every member of the team hid their expressions in the shadows, and only Isaac's impassioned speech was left in the field. We can't afford to lose our strength again. If we lose more people this time, we will be in a worse situation next time. So it's necessary to waste some time. This way, we can better ensure that we complete the mission. Agreed. I think Isaac is right. Agreed. The other 3 senior apprentices, Sheila, Lynder, and Bruce, quickly expressed their agreement. Mary, the only senior apprentice who did not express her opinion, stood in the shadow of the rocky peak where the bonfire could not reach. Therefore, everyone could not help but look at Sabrina, who had always been the leader of the team. Sabrina raised her head and looked around. As her eyes rolled, a special mechanical sound was heard. Compared to last time, her head, which had obviously been modified by mechanical witchcraft, had some subtle and strange changes. However, no one could say for sure what had changed and what was strange about it. It was more of a vague feeling. Sabrina withdrew her gaze. Just as she was about to announce something, an unfamiliar voice suddenly sounded in the temporary camp. You can team up if you want, but Mary and I will only carry out one mission. This voice was clear and firm. Everyone looked towards the source of the voice and were shocked. This was because the one who had spoken was the junior apprentice Grimm, who they did not see as a burden to the party. No, they could no longer call him junior apprentice Grimm. They should call him intermediate apprentice Grimm. They did not care about Grimm's increase in strength. In this gloomy and treacherous underground world, even senior apprentices would not be able to protect themselves when faced with danger. A newly advanced intermediate apprentice might not even have the ability to escape from the aftermath of a battle between strong people. Thus, he was excluded from the discussion just now. Mary, who was hidden in the darkness, did not say a word. It was obvious that she had silently agreed to this. This undoubtedly made everyone even more confused. Do you know what you're talking about? Sabrina's slightly deep and strange voice sounded in the camp. Although there was no threat in her words, there was no doubt that a strong and domineering aura could be felt. Kid, you just stay there obediently. There's no room for you to speak here. If you really want to act alone, then go to the deepest cave. Isaac did not hold back and roared threateningly. Okay, we'll go to the deepest cave. Grimm's answer was straightforward. What? What did you say? Isaac's face showed a surprised expression. I said that Mary and I will complete the mission in the furthest cave. After that, we'll return to the Magus Tower. You can take your time to explore the other 4 mission points. You, not to mention Isaac, even the other 2 quasi-sorcerers raised their heads and sized up this arrogant intermediate acolyte once more. However, no matter how they tried to sense him, the feedback from this young lad was very weak. It did not seem like he was some powerful person in disguise. Did he have something to rely on, or was there something strange about that red-robed Mary? Since they could not find an answer from Grimm, they could not help but look at Mary, who was in the shadows. Oomph, this scoundrel, always using me as a cover. Mary was roaring in her heart, but on the surface, she still looked calm and composed. However, under the protection of the blood-red glow, the 3 quasi-sorcerers could not see through the protection of the blood elemental wizard power. Is this what you want too? Although Sabrina was sitting, a domineering aura was already rolling towards Mary. Yes, give us the mission item. Mary walked out of the shadows and spread out her fair and dazzling right hand, facing Sabrina, the would-be wizard. After a moment of silence, a magic wand-like item was thrown into Mary's hand. Mary examined the authenticity of the item with rapt attention and nodded in satisfaction. She kept the item and turned around to walk into the deep, winding tunnel ahead. Wait, this is for you too. This time, Sabrina threw out a crystal ball. After Mary examined it carefully, her beautiful face was slightly stunned. She nodded at Sabrina with a complicated expression. Thanks, I owe you one. She did not say anything else and disappeared into the darkness with Grimm. The right side of Sabrina's face, which was half covered by the silver mask, was expressionless. Only her left eye, which had been modified into a mechanical eye, emitted a scarlet light. Let's go. There's still a long way to go. After a long while, Sabrina's deep voice finally sounded again. At this moment, Grimm and Mary were already walking through the pitch-black underground world. For the first time, the summoned demon crocodile hunter actually swallowed both of them, and then sank into the dark, lightless soil. Following the directions indicated by the witchcraft tool, they continuously passed through the dark caves and tunnels one after another. Fortunately, Mary wasn't an overly plump person. On the contrary, after hugging Mary, Grimm felt that she was too soft and slender. However, she felt warm and smooth to the touch, and there was even a hint of fragrance in the darkness. It felt great. There was only a limited amount of space for the demon crocodiles, so the 2 of them could only hug each other and squeeze in the space. In the eyes of others, the 2 of them might be too flirtatious, but Grimm could not enjoy it at all. This was because Mary's sharp nails were moving around on his back, and her sharp canine teeth were resting on his neck. If Grimm had any ulterior motives, Mary would definitely leave him with an unforgettable memory, since she was a quick-witted person. Cough. Perhaps this was Mary's personal code of conduct. I can take liberties with you, I can. If you dare to act rashly, I'll make sure you remember it forever. Although the 2 of them were entangled, Grimm was gritting his teeth, afraid that he would lose control and bring disaster upon himself. Fortunately, there were still many things that could distract him. Thus, when his mind sank into the special vision of the demon crocodile hunter, he forgot about the awkwardness in front of him and focused on controlling the direction of the demon crocodile hunter. Before Sabrina left, she threw a crystal ball to Mary. It contained the route that she had explored during her last patrol, as well as the distribution of underground creatures and monsters that they might encounter along the way. With this clear 3-dimensional map and the precise direction control of the AI chip, the demon crocodile hunter could pass through all the tunnels and rock walls along the way. Only when they encountered a large area of solid rock would they consider taking a longer route. That was why Grimm only took 4 hours to reach the destination that Sabrina had taken 27 hours to reach last time. After emerging from a small, dark cave, Grimm jumped off the demon crocodile hunter with Mary in his arms. After confirming the location of the mission point with the item again, they were less than 200 meters away from where they were. Only then did the 2 of them relax, but they immediately raised their vigilance. Those underground bastards had a lot of strange spells. Who knew if they would set up some automatic traps near the mission point? Once they found out about their whereabouts, the journey back would be 10 times more dangerous. However, Grimm was calm about this. Apart from completing the mandatory mission given by the Wizard Tower, he had another more important mission to complete today. The elite mission of the training camp. Apart from fighting for rare underground resources, elite acolytes from both sides would try to ambush and kill each other's acolyte squads whenever they had the chance. In the depths of the underground, there are not only rare resources, but also special metal ores that were rarely seen on the surface. However, most of these ores and resources were under the control of fallen wizards. Each place was guarded by a team of 5 to 10 acolytes. Chapter 77. Mine number 7 was a bloodstone mine located deeper in the mission site. There, a special mineral called bloodstone was the most commonly produced. This thing itself was not very useful, but it was often used as a catalyst for various witchcraft experiments. In particular, bloodstone powder had an obvious effect on purifying magic potions, so it was very popular in the underground market everywhere. However, the reason the training camp sent Kevin's team there for a surprise attack was obviously not for a mere bloodstone mine, but for another kind of raw gemstone or that was associated with the bloodstone mine, blood garnet. As a raw gemstone, or once it fell into the hands of some jewelry masters, it could be processed into a variety of magical accessories. They would try every possible way to draw out the mysterious power contained within the gemstone, and the magical accessories made from it would have some incredible power. For example, the recovery earrings that Grimm had sold before were made from a magical gemstone called emerald olive. Bloodstone, ores, even elementary bloodstones that had undergone preliminary refinement, were worth no more than 10 magic crystals per kilogram in the underground market. In order to make a fortune by robbing them, the elite apprentices of the training camp would need to prepare a long underground caravan to transport them away. On the other hand, each raw blood garnet was only the size of an egg, but a large group of chambers of commerce and wizard families were willing to buy it at the price of 200 magic crystals per kilogram. Therefore, after comparing the two, Bald Fu decided to raid mine number 7 to plunder the blood garnets that had been stored there for half a month, instead of the overly heavy and cheap bloodstone ores. In the past, the underground attacks were more like a game of chess. The resource points or points occupied by both sides were almost constant, and the general strength of the other side was also clear at a glance. So today, you lead a team to raid my resource point, and tomorrow, I will lead a team to intercept and kill your mission team halfway. Both sides fought back and forth in this dark and deep underground tunnel, killing each other until the sky was dark and the earth was dark, and blood flowed like a river. However, there was one thing that both sides abided by very well, and there had never been any violations. That was, fighting was one thing, but no malicious destruction of resource points or points was allowed. Seriously speaking, a considerable part of the profits of surface wizards and fallen wizards were pinned on these continuously mined resources and minerals. Once someone set a bad example and destroyed the other party's resource point, it would be very difficult to protect their own resource point. Therefore, in order to prevent the two sides from breaking up, the two sides condensed these unwritten rules that could not be written down in the hundreds of years of competition. You can snatch the resources, but as long as the elite apprentices you send out can defeat our guardian, the resources will be yours. But destroying resources and the environment was not allowed. Anyone who maliciously destroyed a resource point will be hunted down by the Magi from both sides. Therefore, taking advantage of the short 200-meter journey, Grimm cautiously moved forward while telling Mary about the underground situation he knew. He had already made up his mind. He decided to use this trip to the underworld to pull Mary into Kevin's team and help her become an elite apprentice as soon as possible. However, in order to achieve this, Mary needed to perform well in the raid on mine number 7. According to what Kevin said, The training camp had already started to get in touch with a quasi-witch named Sabrina. As for the other members, before they displayed their extraordinary strength, they were just objects to be observed. They were not enough to pique Fu's interest. When the team first arrived, there were 3 prospective wizards. Now, Grimm was considered a member of the training camp, and Sabrina was in the process of being contacted. As for the other 2 prospective wizards, Leo and Marcus, they were not in Fu's eyes at all. Therefore, if Mary wanted to enter the training camp, she had to at least perform well in the underground raid. To be honest, she did not need Grimm to encourage her. Ever since she heard that the damn training camp had pulled Grimm into it without her participation, Mary was already in a state of rage. However, for someone as temperamental as her, the more angry she was, the brighter her smile would be. Perhaps she would only reveal her true colors when she hunted for food. This was a quiet and deep underground cave. Not long after it calmed down, 5 strange figures of different heights broke into the cave again. The person in the lead was tall and strong, surrounded by a light blue halo of ice crystals. Wherever he passed, the damp air was frozen by the sudden drop of the cold current, and ice shards fell off. He was obviously the leader of the 5. Facing the empty underground cave, his angry roar echoed in the quiet cave. Where are they? Didn't they say someone broke in? Then where are they? Judging from his low and hoarse voice, it was the prospective wizard, Langdon. Langdon, don't be impatient. Since we promised to avenge you, we will not give up halfway. Today's incident is strange. We need to think about it. One of the black-robed men could not help but speak up. Yes. Today's incident is really strange. Since we got the news, we have been waiting for them. No matter which way they came to this mission point, they can't hide from us. But another black-robed man voiced out his doubts. But they strangely went around our interception net. Gary, is he the junior wizard apprentice you mentioned last time who can travel freely underground? The third black-robed man asked calmly. Hearing this, Langdon, who was leading the group, paused for a moment. The chill in the air grew even heavier. Immediately after, Langdon's cold roar sounded in the cave. The elemental aura here has not completely dissipated, which means they just left. If we move fast, we might be able to stop them. Felix, it's all up to you now. Felix, who was named by Langdon, was also a prospective wizard. It could be said that all the people Langdon had brought here today were prospective wizards. Being able to bring 4 prospective wizard apprentices to help him take revenge was enough to show that Langdon's strength was extraordinary. However, to be more precise, everyone had gladly accepted such a dangerous mission for the sake of the teacher behind him. And those who could be respected by a group of prospective wizards were, of course, the famous fallen wizards in Elysium City, Black Light. There was no one in Elysium City who did not know of this name. As a powerful fallen wizard, even in the gloomy crypt, the name Blacklight was well known. As his disciple, Langdon was also a very influential figure among the fallen acolytes in Elysium City. Although Felix was a little unwilling to be named, Felix still stood out. All of you, gather around me. Felix ordered coldly. He gently inserted the long staff in his hand into the hard stone floor beneath his feet. With the continuous influx of earth elemental energy, the fist-sized earthen yellow crystal at the tip of the staff emitted a dazzling elemental glow. Under the cover of the elemental glow, a faintly discernible and mysterious spell formation appeared on the floor beneath everyone's feet. Everyone gathered together. We're about to teleport over. Hearing Felix's reminder, everyone gathered around him, placing themselves within the range of the mysterious spell formation. Prepare yourselves. Do not resist the earth elemental teleportation. Go! Following Felix's shout, the mysterious spell formation beneath their feet suddenly surged with an uncountable amount of earth elemental energy. The earth elemental energy was so dense that it resembled smoke and fog. It wrapped around them, and as a strange earthen yellow ring of light swept past, the smoke suddenly solidified and instantly enveloped them into mud statues. The moment the mysterious spell formation disappeared, the 5 clay sculptures crumbled, turning into mud and dregs on the ground. Not a trace of flesh could be seen within the disintegrated mud statues. The 5 quasi-wizards had completely disappeared. Langdon had miscalculated and thought that Grimm would be eager to return to the surface after completing his mission. He had actually gone in the wrong direction and went to find trouble with Sabrina and the others. While the 5 fallen quasi-wizards had directly escaped to the upper passageway, close to the surface, with Felix's Terra teleportation spell, Grimm and Mary were lurking around the deeper part of mine number 7. The other members of Kevin's team had not arrived yet, so Grimm and Mary cooperated and began to investigate the surroundings of the mine. Grimm was responsible for sending Mary into the mine using the stealth ability of the demon crocodile hunter. Mary, on the other hand, transformed into a vampire bat that flew noiselessly, trampling through the entire mine. What was even more ridiculous was that Mary, who had swaggered through the area, had clearly memorized all the tunnels, miners, and the positions of the fallen Acolyte Guardian Squad. She had even stored the information in a photographic crystal. Therefore, when Kevin and the other 5 members rushed to the hidden rendezvous point, what they saw was this clear 3-dimensional image of the mine pit. The miners were the rat folk of the underground race. There were about 200 rat folk miners in the entire mine number 7, and the guards were 17 underground mercenaries and 6 fallen apprentices. During the attack, the rat folk wouldn't participate in the battle at all. Therefore, when planning, they only needed to consider the defensive forces. After all, for these rat folk, no matter who controlled the mine, they would obey orders. As long as there was a sufficient daily supply of food, they did not care who they were serving. Looking at the panoramic view of the mine provided by the 2 newcomers, Kevin could not help but feel a chill run down his spine. Grimm's ability was like a bug. In the underground world, as long as there was no protective spell formation, he could go in and out. It was impossible to guard against him. Mary's vampire bat transformation was also very elusive. No one would be able to guard against a cold-blooded creature that could crawl along the top of the wall. But everything the other party had set up could not hide from the vampire's infrared vision and life perception. Chapter 78. Apart from the basic defensive strength, Kevin was especially concerned about the strength of the fallen acolytes. According to past practice, there would be at least 2 or 3 quasi-sorcerers among the 6 fallen acolytes, while the rest were all high-level acolytes. However, today was a little strange. There was only 1 quasi-sorcerer among the 6 fallen acolytes, which confused Kevin. The situation of the fallen acolytes was completely different from that of the Orthodox Magus Tower. The number of acolytes in an Orthodox Magus Tower was like a pyramid. In order to nurture a quasi-sorcerer, they needed at least 5 or 10 high-level acolytes as backup. In order to nurture a high-level acolyte, they also needed 5 or 10 intermediate acolytes as backup, and so on. It was by relying on the accumulation of numbers and resources that the Magus Tower was able to discover elite acolytes with astonishing potential and talent from hundreds or thousands of beginner acolytes, and then nurture them. However, the structure of the fallen acolytes, who were hiding underground, was completely different. In the fallen acolytes' camp, there were almost no beginner or intermediate acolytes. In their eyes, there was no need for trash to exist. All the resources had to be concentrated in the hands of acolytes with potential and strength. Therefore, under this cruel law of the Black Forest, the ratio of quasi-sorcerers among the fallen acolytes was extremely high. Sometimes, it could even reach a ratio of 1-to-1 with high-level acolytes. This was also what gave the elite acolytes in the training camp the most headaches. If both sides met and the number of quasi-sorcerers was equal, they could still fight. However, if they did not have enough quasi-sorcerers, the battle would most likely end in a one-sided defeat. After all, a quasi-sorcerer without an opponent of the same rank was the difference between a wolf and a goat. No matter how well-equipped the goat was, and how many times its opponent, it would still be powerless against an unscrupulous wolf. However, who would have thought that there was only 1 quasi-sorcerer among the 6 fallen acolytes in mine number 7? This ratio was obviously lower than the norm. On the other hand, there were 2 quasi-sorcerers among the 6 members in Kevin's team, and the rest were all powerful high-level acolytes. This kind of strength was enough to crush the opponent. As for the 17 underground mercenaries, apart from a few strong fellows, the rest were almost ignored by the acolytes. If a battle between apprentices really broke out, no matter how many of them there were, they would be nothing more than rotten meat sent to their deaths. According to Grimm's plan, in a battle where his side had the upper hand, they would definitely use bait, ambush, assassination, and all sorts of tricks. But when the battle really started, he was dumbfounded. So this was how the underground battle was carried out. Without concealing their superior strength, Kevin led his 5 teammates, Grimm and Mary, to quickly occupy the entrance of mine number 7. Then, he threw 2 elemental fireballs to intimidate them, and the opposing defenders swarmed out of the mine. This was a natural karst cave the size of 3 football fields. It was a perfect battlefield for both sides to fight. It could be seen that this place had been through many trials. Collapsed stalagmites and stalactites were strewn all over the place, broken rock walls covered in scorched or black stripes, and the stone floor was covered in mottled bloodstains that had not been cleaned for years. At the 2 ends of the cave, the 2 factions quickly lined up and faced each other, with 200 meters between them. Of course, the ones in front were the underground mercenaries. The mercenaries had incomplete equipment, and most of them could not even gather a set of leather armor. They walked into the battlefield in ragged clothes. The 17 mercenaries included 3 gnoll assassins, 2 lizardman beast tamers, 1 spirit catcher, and 11 werewolf warriors. Apart from the 3 gnoll assassins and the spirit catcher that he needed to pay some attention to, the rest of them were just meat dishes that attracted the enemy's attention on the battlefield. The fallen quasi-sorcerer, hiding at the back of the team, was a middle-aged man with a dark and thin face. When he saw the 2 surface quasi-sorcerers in the opposing team, his face turned so gloomy that black water could be squeezed out. Damn it, damn it, damn it. That bastard Felix said that it would not be a problem for him to leave for a day or 2. How did they seal off the passage to the upper level and let such a powerful team pass through? Felix, you bastard. If this garrison mission fails, you'll have to bear all the responsibility. He roared madly in his heart. But on the surface, this fallen quasi-sorcerer was still calm and composed as he began to issue battle orders. Colorful elemental shields began to rise on the bodies of the sorcerer apprentices. Bright red flame shields, crackling lightning shields, pink smoke suddenly pervading the air, ice crystal armors that attacked people with chilling air, and thorny armor that stood tall and upright with a green aura. In the blink of an eye, all the sorcerer apprentices had wrapped their bodies in different colors, shapes, and effects of elemental protection. Of course, this was only a benefit for the sorcerer apprentices. The mercenaries who were used as meat shields did not enjoy this benefit. Unknowingly, the 3 gnoll assassins in the enemy team had already disappeared. Meanwhile, the 2 lizardman summoners loudly chanted in the lizardman language that was difficult to understand. Very quickly, they summoned 4 tall, petrified lizards in front of them. 11 werewolf warriors wore tattered leather armor. They held a flail or a thick wooden stick in one hand and a simple wooden shield in the other. They shouted loudly as they rushed over. Behind them, after the fallen sorcerer apprentices completed their individual defense, they hurriedly chanted loudly again. This time, they were chanting the incantation of an offensive spell. Grimm, I'll leave these small fries to you. Although Kevin was a high-level sorcerer apprentice who was more inclined towards close-range attacks, after loudly ordering Grimm, he still chose to fight back with long-range spells with his companions. Ever since Mary mutated into a vampire, she seemed to have forgotten all her previous spells. Currently, she only had some passive racial talents. Therefore, facing this kind of battle, her figure flashed and disappeared into the shadows around her, disappearing without a trace. More than 10 colorful offensive spells crisscrossed in the air above the cave. Some intercepted, some collided, and some stirred up a splendid sea of elements. The violent and completely irregular elemental explosions swept through the center of the battlefield and also involved the charging werewolf team. Of the 11 werewolf warriors, less than half were lucky enough to pass through the death zone. Even the remaining 5 were riddled with wounds and were still in a state of shock. Unfortunately, before they could regroup and form a formation again, a gigantic creature suddenly appeared in front of them. The earth spears and a large area of earth spear spikes were shot out, and they were all wiped out in one fell swoop. The weakness of ordinary underground creatures in the face of witchcraft users was evident from this. Grim rode on a magic crocodile, but did not order it to charge forward. The fallen sorcerers were in a neat formation. If he recklessly charged forward, they would only need one volley to blast him and the magic crocodile into pieces. Grim finally understood. No wonder both sides needed to form such a neat formation that resembled the armies of a human kingdom. The fundamental reason was the terrifying offensive power of elemental sorcery. Although those quasi-sorcerers were all high and mighty, and in small-scale battles, they would often beat 2 or 3 high-level sorcerers to the point of wetting their pants and running away. However, in this kind of situation, no matter how arrogant and conceited they were, they did not dare to charge into the enemy's formation. Most of the individual defensive spells of quasi-sorcerers had a base defense of 80 to 100 points. This kind of defense could be broken by a volley of spells from 3 high-level sorcerers. Therefore, before they advanced to become sorcerers, they did not dare to take the risk before their bodies could withstand a small volley of spells. Therefore, even though Kevin's side had the advantage in numbers, he still chose the safest oppressive tactic. He used his side's superior sorcery power to directly crush the enemy's team. After just 2 rounds of attacks, the difference in sorcery power between the 2 sides became obvious. Although many spells were intercepted and countered, the number of spells on Kevin's side that fell into the enemy's formation was obviously higher. Amidst the dazzling and explosive waves of spells, the fallen sorcerer's team began to panic. Most of the external defenses of the fallen sorcerers had dimmed, and a few of them had even been injured. On the other hand, Kevin's team was still in a neat formation, fully equipped with defense. Grim was high up on the demon crocodile, allowing the native hunters to continuously throw earth spears at the slowly climbing petrified lizards. He also followed Kevin's instructions and contributed a flame spear, causing a high-level sorcerer in the enemy's team to wail like a wolf. He stood high and could see far. He had a comprehensive view of the whole situation and soon discovered Mary's whereabouts. At the edge of the battlefield, a muffled groan was suddenly heard from the shadows. Immediately after, the hazy and illusory figure of a Knoll assassin suddenly appeared. It covered its throat with its hand and staggered a few steps before falling to its knees. Blood gushed out from the gaps between its fingers, and it could not stop it no matter how hard it tried. Just as it was about to die, the sound of metal clashing suddenly came from the shadows nearby. Soon, another Knoll assassin was forced out of the shadows. Its eyes had been stabbed, and its body was covered with terrifying claw marks of varying depths. It waved its dagger wildly in the air, shouting loudly. Unfortunately, it could no longer see any enemies. When the blood in its body was almost completely drained, it let out a low hiss and fell to the ground. The death of 2 of its companions finally frightened the 3rd person. The last Knoll assassin suddenly appeared, turned around, and ran away as fast as it could. Unfortunately, before it could run more than 10 meters, a dazzling red light flashed, and its head flew into the sky. The headless body ran a few more steps before falling to the ground. Chapter 79. Beautiful, beautiful. Vampires were indeed the nobles of the night. Even killing people was done with elegance and calmness. It was so artistic, Grim could not help but praise in a low voice. Then he threw the flame spear in his hand again. This time, his target was a guy with 5 skulls hovering around him. The flame spears suddenly exploded and took away 2 of the skulls, which made the apprentice furious. He waved his black staff at Grim, and invisible curses kept attacking him. Grim commanded the native hunter to block all the curses for him, while he focused on attacking the necromancy apprentice. Curse attacks, carrion flying insects, voodoo skulls, bone spears, blind eyes. The spells that the apprentice could use were really eye-opening for Grim. If it was not for the help of the chip's elemental vision, he would not have been able to defeat the necromancy apprentice, even if he had 9 lives. The only things that he could threaten the enemy were his flame spear and the native hunter's earth spear. The lack of long-range spells made Grim think that he needed to develop a magic puppet for long-range attacks from time to time. Although Grim was not strong enough to break the defense of the necromancy apprentice, the team behind him could. After gaining the upper hand in the battle, the unbridled and chaotic witchcraft attacks put a lot of pressure on the fallen apprentices on the other side. Many of the apprentices began to slowly retreat, unable to hold on any longer. This was the basic pattern of the battle between the two sides. First, the two sides formed a group formation and attacked each other with long-range spells like soldiers. Once one side could not hold on, the other side would collapse. Then, it would be a small-scale battle. Usually, the battle would break out between 2 or 3 apprentices, and the battlefield could be anywhere in the surroundings. Finally, with the powerful spells of the 2 quasi-sorcerers on Kevin's side, the opposite side of the team collapsed. The apprentices, who had lost their confidence in winning, turned around and escaped into the surrounding underground tunnels with their bodies full of injuries. It was obvious that they were running away like birds and beasts, with no intention of covering each other or helping each other. Moreover, the 6 fallen apprentices were all on their own. There were no signs of them running away together. On the long escape route to the blissful city, perhaps the companions with ulterior motives were far more terrifying than the enemies chasing after them. Kevin whistled, and the 8 members of the team split into 2 groups, chasing after the fallen apprentice. A quasi-sorcerer and Kevin set their sights on the enemy quasi-sorcerer, while the remaining quasi-sorcerer formed a separate team. The rest of the team members split into different groups and chased after the enemy into the darkness. Grim didn't greet anyone, and instead commanded the crocodile to chase after his old rival. The dark tunnel was silent. Alan once again activated the ring of agility on his right pinky, increasing his speed by a few notches. The rugged terrain in the shadows wasn't a hindrance at all. His thin and shriveled body seemed to possess boundless energy, supporting him to quickly pass through one cave after another. The roads in the underground world were always winding, broken, and complicated. In every small cave or karst cave, there were countless narrow passages that could barely allow a person to pass through. Taking advantage of his familiarity with the terrain, in less than the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Alan had escaped for 3 miles, passing through more than a dozen tunnels and caves. When the glow of the agility spell disappeared from his body, Alan finally stopped. He leaned against a solid rock wall, gasping for air. His chest was so thin that his ribs could be clearly seen, and his breath was like a broken bellow. Although the surroundings were quiet, Alan was still holding the black staff tightly in his hand. As long as there was any sound or movement around him, he would be able to activate the white bone spear stored in the white crystal on top of the staff within half a second. After gasping for a while, Alan finally stabilized his breathing. He listened to the road he came from, but he didn't hear any strange sounds. Maybe he was lucky that no enemies were chasing after him. Aaron let out a self-deprecating sneer. Ever since he became a necromancy apprentice, his luck had never been good. It seemed that even the will of the wizarding world hated him, making him a pathetic, abandoned child. Although he didn't sense anything strange, Alan still felt very uneasy. In the silent darkness, there seemed to be a ferocious beast peeping at him, ready to swallow him at any time. No, I have to get out of here. Alan made up his mind. When he was about to leave, he realized that the wet soil under his feet had turned into a slowly flowing acid swamp. His feet had sunk into it without him knowing. Damn it, it's the acid swamp spell. Alan patted his neck heavily. The white bone necklace around his neck flashed, and 2 skulls with the ability to attack and defend appeared around him again. When he was escaping just now, In order to avoid attracting attention, he had turned off his personal protection, which was why he had fallen into the enemy's trap. After experiencing the previous battle, his white bones defense was clearly at its lowest level. Under the corrosion of the dense negative energy, the acid swamp under his feet made a sizzling sound, and Alan quickly got rid of the acid swamp spell. Two muffled thuds sounded. In the darkness not far away, a shadow that looked like a dark mountain began to move forward, and the earth element was even denser. Damn it, it's that bastard who rode a mud crocodile. That kid was so brave. He was only a middle-level wizard, but he dared to chase after a high-level fallen apprentice. Aaron laughed sinisterly. He opened his mouth wide and spat out a large number of buzzing black insects from his dirty mouth. In the blink of an eye, they gathered into a black cloud and surged towards the huge shadow. He also quickly chanted a hoarse and unpleasant witchcraft spell. From time to time, a fist-sized skull would appear in his hand, and he would throw it into the distance with a pale green glow. This kind of voodoo skull that he made himself would explode violently no matter what it touched. Apart from causing great physical damage to the enemy, it also had a voodoo attack. The terrifying voodoo poison was a compound poison that could even melt rocks. But just as he was expecting to hear the screams of the enemy, a flaming spear suddenly lit up the entire cave and appeared in another position. Amidst the raging flames, a handsome young man was smiling at him, and the flaming spear was held in his hand. Don't kill me. We can talk." Alan looked at the flame spear in horror. The flame spear pierced the skull and exploded, and the blinding elemental flames swept toward where he was. After 3 fingers, Alan staggered out of the sea of fire. He was in a miserable state. The little flesh on his body was burnt to a crisp by the flames, and half of the few magic tools he had were destroyed. The white crystal on the top of his cane had also been broken. The ghosts and vengeful souls that were bound by the necromancy spell began to escape one after another. Kid, do you think you can kill me like this? Today's matter is not over. The next time we meet, Alan clawed the ground and cursed angrily. His right pinky finger began to emit a white light. That was the light of an escape spell. The spell hidden in his pinky finger was his last resort to save his life. Seeing that he would be able to escape with 2 fingers, Alan's murky eyes shone with hope. However, at this moment, he suddenly felt the rock wall beside him move. When he looked over in shock, he was shocked to discover that an incomparably huge eye was staring at him coldly. A huge triangular snake head, a wide mouth, jagged fangs, and a snake's tongue that flicked in and out. Everything that formed this terrifying giant snake was actually rock. Cold and hard rock. Just as he realized all this, the giant snake opened its mouth wide and swallowed him whole. After a long time, the cave finally returned to its peaceful state. Grim stood silently in a corner of the cave, not riding on the demon crocodile. In the battle just now, he used the demon crocodile hunter to attract most of the enemy's attacks, and he took advantage of the situation to break the enemy's defense. In the end, it was the rock python that appeared for the first time that he killed it. There was a slight tremor in the darkness. The demon crocodile hunter came near him, and the aborigine hunter on its back had already melted, leaving only half of its body. On the other side, the rock rumbled, and a huge rock python slithered towards him. It opened its mouth and spat out a broken body. "Ha! A high-level fallen apprentice's head is in my hands." However, the corpse of a necromancer was still scary. That was why Grimm did not do it himself. Instead, he waited for the aborigine hunter to repair itself before letting it search the enemy's body for spoils of war. Then, he let the demon crocodile hunter swallow him into its stomach. After that, he swaggered back to the battlefield. Some of his teammates who went out to kill the enemy had already returned. Only a few had succeeded, and most returned empty-handed. It cannot be helped. The underground world was too suitable for escaping. They could create a cave-in anywhere, and the pursuers would return empty-handed. Moreover, the fallen apprentice's life-saving skills were top-notch. Defeating them was easy, but killing them was much more difficult. Kevin and the quasi-sorcerer in the team could not kill the enemy quasi-sorcerer. Instead, another quasi-sorcerer successfully brought back a head. The remaining advanced apprentices did not manage to kill them. So when Grimm's demon crocodile hunter spat out an enemy's corpse, everyone could not help but look at him in a different light. A camp battle was a camp battle. Although Grimm took advantage of his opponent's unfamiliarity with him and luckily won 2 battles, it did not mean that he was really that strong. However, when the corpse of the fallen apprentice appeared, everyone looked at him differently. Chapter 80. Just as everyone was praising Grimm, a red shadow flashed, and Mary came back. With a powerful swing, a withered head with teeth bared was thrown in front of everyone. Kevin was only a senior apprentice, but he could command 2 prospective sorcerers. He must have some special tricks up his sleeve. However, he was also embarrassed by today's situation. As elite apprentices specially trained by the training camp, the 6 of them only got 1 head in total, while the 2 newbies got 1 each. This made him, the elite team leader, secretly exclaim that the newbies were fierce. Out of the 6 fallen apprentices guarding the mine, they had managed to kill half of them. This kind of achievement was quite commendable. However, more than an hour had passed since they started fighting, and there was not much time left for them to plunder resources. After all, the number 7 mine was deep in the underground world, and it would be difficult for them to defend it. Once the reinforcements from Elysium City arrived, it would be a new battle royale. The rat folk who were working as miners were not afraid of Kevin and his team. The rat folk queen even came out to haggle with them. She even offered to waive all fees as long as an apprentice was willing to sleep with her. She even gave them some of the rat folk tribe's treasures for the past year. However, looking at the rat folk queen's fluffy little face, round body, and plump breasts, all the elite apprentices could not help but feel disgusted. Every time the rat folk queen looked at them, they would have goosebumps and want to vomit. So, after paying 500 magic crystals in double, Kevin got 26 blood garnets from the rat folk queen. Each of these blood garnets was the size of an egg, and the total value was estimated at 4,800 magic crystals. If they were successfully brought back, each member of the team would get 200 to 500 magic crystals. The reason why there was such a big difference in the rewards was related to the contribution of the team members during the mission. For example, Grimm, Mary, and the prospective sorcerer had directly taken ahead, so the reward distribution would definitely be biased. After discussing with the 2 prospective sorcerers, Kevin quickly came up with a specific distribution plan. Prospective sorcerer Grimm would get 3, prospective sorcerer Randolph 2, Kevin 2, Grimm 2, Mary 2, and the other 3 senior sorcerers would each get 1. As for the remaining 12 pills, they needed to be handed over to the training camp to be purchased by the Turlock Trading Company behind Baldi Afu. Only then would the profits be distributed evenly among the individuals. As for the blood garnet that each person obtained, they could deal with it themselves. Presumably, those rich and imposing sorcerer families would definitely take the initiative to discuss the purchase of blood garnets. Since the mission here was completed, the only problem left was how to return safely. According to past experience, returning from the mission point to the surface was the most dangerous part of the journey. Most of the mission team's casualties occurred during this process. Therefore, having the life to earn money but not the life to spend it was still a very cold problem. The idea of returning to the camp together was the worst, and the probability of being ambushed was 100%. Regardless of whether it was the cunning underground monsters or the corrupted acolytes who caught wind of the news, their return journey would be fraught with danger. Therefore, at this time, it was best for them to go their own ways and return to the surface using their own methods. If they could not escape, they could only blame themselves for being too weak and not others. Therefore, after the spoils of war were distributed, everyone said goodbye to each other and went their separate ways. There were at least 80 paths leading to the surface anyway. As long as they were not that unlucky, they would not have to worry about being blocked. When everyone had dispersed, Mary jumped onto the demon crocodile and looked around with her scarlet eyes. She shouted impatiently, Let's go. I feel that this mission is a bit dangerous, as if someone is watching us. Be careful on the way back. Grimm's heart skipped a beat, and he could not help but frown. In this era, where willpower was king, Grimm did not dare to ignore any signs of danger. This was especially true for Mary, an ancient mutant whose power came from a mutated bloodline. Her understanding of the plane's laws was far deeper than his. If even she felt a little uneasy, it meant that something bad was about to happen to them. Grimm picked up Mary again and merged with the demon crocodile. The demon crocodile's huge body slowly sank into the ground and disappeared. Using the demon crocodile's earth magic, Grimm patrolled the surrounding area, but did not find any suspicious traces. After ruling out the possibility that mine number 7 was a trap, Grimm could only lead the demon crocodile back to the surface skeptically. According to his previous habits, Grimm would run along the underground path for a while and only choose to go through when he had a detour. This would minimize the consumption of the demon crocodile's earth magic. But now that he was on guard, he did not care about the magic consumption. Instead, he chose to go underground all the way and quietly make his way to the surface. As there were large stretches of metal ores and hard rock formations everywhere, he had to constantly choose his way through. Therefore, it was impossible for him to travel too quickly through the mud. 3 hours later, they were already halfway through the journey. Grimm finally relaxed a little. However, just as he was driving the demon crocodile hunter to pass through 2 huge rock formations that stretched for several miles, the demon crocodile's huge body seemed to have passed through a calm surface of water. The earth magic that filled its entire body suddenly went out of control. It was a trap. Grimm instantly realized that something was wrong. However, as the demon crocodile's earth magic went berserk, the huge pressure of the earth around it suddenly increased. Grimm's expression changed. He hurriedly drove the demon crocodile into the nearest underground passage. It was a deep, dark, and silent passage. The passage was winding and unfathomable, like the intestines of a terrifying giant beast. Most of the passage was between the rock formations. Only a small part of the passage was still wet and dark. But at this moment, this section of the mud wall suddenly boiled and exploded with a bang. A huge object rushed into this passage with mud and gravel flying in all directions. Soon after, 2 humanoid shadows rushed out from the gigantic creature. "What's wrong? What's wrong with your crocodile?" Mary's anxious voice sounded in the darkness. "It's an ambush. There's a special spell formation in the area we just passed. It can actually interfere with the operation of the demon crocodile's earth magic. We have to get out of here as soon as possible." Mary was slightly startled. Her scarlet eyes shone brightly in the darkness. "Which way?" Grimm's eyes were also flickering under the goggles. Looking at the dark passage on both sides, he could not make up his mind. "Oomph," Mary snorted. "Let me do it." Mary abruptly stood up straight, her body facing one side of the tunnel. She took a deep breath and abruptly roared. Her voice was so sharp and high-pitched that Grimm could only feel a buzz in his head. He could not hear anything else. As the strange sound waves quickly spread in the passage, Mary closed her eyes and stood still, as if she was listening to something. The passage is 327 meters long, winding upwards. At the end, there's a small cave. Inside, Mary paused, and her voice suddenly turned sharp. "2 people. There are 2 people rushing towards us." Grimm's eyes suddenly turned fierce. 2 people, and they were rushing towards this place without any scruples. Needless to say, they must have thought that they could easily defeat the 2 of them. Even without facing them, Grimm was sure that they were 2 quasi-wizard-level fallen apprentices. Since the enemy was so well prepared, the surrounding passages would not be safe. Grimm waved his hand to disperse the demon crocodile hunters. He picked up the 2 summoning magic crystals from the disintegrated soil, turned around, and ran towards the other side of the passage with Mary. The floor of the underground passage was always rugged and slippery. The uneven ground and the intersecting small protrusions made it difficult for Grimm, who had less than 5 points of agility, to move forward. Even if he walked steadily on this kind of path, he could still slip, not to mention running with all his might. The uneven ground was not a big deal, but the problem was that the top of his head was not smooth either. Thick and thin stalagmites quietly blocked the way forward. If a person only cared about looking down at the road, it was easy to bump into one of the stalagmites. So in the first half of the journey, Grim dragged Mary along, but after running for less than 10 meters, Mary used her arms to support Grim. The damp and cold air rushed into Grim's face through his mouth, nostrils, trachea, and into his rapidly rising and falling lungs. Grim felt a chill down his spine, but his mind was extraordinarily calm. Under glimmer vision, a dark tunnel appeared beneath Grim's feet, and the stalagmites in front of him expanded rapidly. However, just as Grim was about to cry out in surprise, the stalagmites slid past him with a whoosh. At this moment, Mary had turned into a ghost traversing in the darkness. Her soft and agile feet only needed to lightly tap on the protrusions on the ground, and they could glide through the air at high speed. Every stalagmite and every narrow passage was a flat road in her eyes. She only needed to lightly tap on the protrusions with the tips of her feet to move through them nimbly and silently. Mary might have already gotten used to this kind of speed, but for someone with less than 5 points of agility, Grim's current mood was even more exciting than riding the craziest and most thrilling roller coaster. If it wasn't for the strong wind pressure pressing against his throat, he would have already vomited. Just as the two of them were running quickly in the dark and deep underground, the passage in front of them suddenly narrowed to the point where only one person could barely pass through. At the narrowest part of the passage, a lightning net suddenly flashed and blocked the way. This lightning net covered the sky and covered the earth, blocking the entire passage. At the edge of the electric net and the rock wall, sparks of electricity splashed out, blinding everyone's eyes. The crackling sound of electricity was even clearer. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.